LoveLore Library. Chapter 601. Lang Haoyu and Murongting's sudden visit was naturally not just for a visit. After everyone sat down, Lang Haoyu frowned and said, "Our people sent out news that the Lu family seems to know about Imo Jingli's son." Feng Zhiyao had just returned to Chu capital, so he naturally did not know what had happened in Chu capital in the past 2 months. He asked in confusion, "Imo Jingli's son? Is it the one Ying gave birth to? Was he kidnapped?" Lang Haoyu clapped his hands and smiled. "Your news is really too slow. Imo Jingli had just become the regent some time ago. When he returned to his residence, he kicked his own son to death." Although this news was suppressed and not spread, most of the nobles in the capital knew about it. Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows. He was not an idiot and naturally understood immediately. He smiled and said, "So Imo Jingli raised someone else's son for nothing. What about now? His son is in the hands of the Lu family. Li, what do you think?" Imo Xiuyao looked at Yi Li and asked. Yi Li frowned and thought for a while. "I don't think it's very likely. Imo Jingqi is very careful and suspicious. He never even trusts the people around him. Imo Jingli spent so much time and effort and still couldn't find any clues. This proves that Imo Jingqi dealt with it very cleanly back then. It doesn't make sense that the Lu family could find it. Also, the timing is a bit too coincidental. Imo Jingqi had just passed away, and the new emperor had not ascended the throne yet, but the Lu family had already thrown out the news of the Li Palace's only son. It really made people think too much." Imo Xiuyao looked at Lang Haoyu. Lang Haoyu shrugged and said, "They also didn't get any specific news. It's just that the Lu family has been secretly moving a lot recently. They can only vaguely know that it's related to Imo Jingli's son. But it still needs time to confirm whether that child is Imo Jingli's son." Imo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and smiled. "There's no need to investigate. It's a waste of time." Lang Haoyu looked at him in confusion. Imo Xiuyao asked, "Does it matter if it is or not?" Hearing this, everyone was startled. Wasn't it? They did not intend to get involved in these matters. Then whether that child was Imo Jingli's son or not had no meaning to them. Imo Xiuyao stood up and looked at Lang Haoyu with a smile. "If you have the time, why don't you investigate the matters of the northern region? Your business and the capital's business in the capital has also closed. Why don't you make a trip there? There was a battle and the city was in the capital city pass." Although there were secret guards protecting him, he was still worried about Lang Huai's secret guard. "I'll go too," Murongting quickly said. Although to Haoyu to was not was to Haodo's family to the family to him to the family to be to Imo Xiuyao naturally could not control Murongting. This was Lang Haoyu's family background. Lang Haoyu said hesitantly, "Haoyu is in the middle of a battle now. It's too dangerous." Murongting snorted, "Do you think I haven't seen a battlefield?" She had grown up at the border with her father since she was young. Furthermore, she had participated in the defense of Yonglin City back then, okay? Jun Han has no one to take care of her in the capital. Do you have the heart? Lang Haoyu continued to persuade. Murongting frowned. This was a problem. Her son had never left her side since he was born. Glancing at Yi Li sitting on the side, Murongting's eyes lit up. She looked at Yi Li eagerly. Yi Li covered her mouth and smiled. "As long as you're not afraid of Jun Han being bullied by Qin, just send her over." Taking care of one child was the same as taking care of 2 children. Besides, although Imo Xiaobao was occasionally clingy, he was actually quite good at taking care of himself. They did not need to spend much effort on him. However, for some reason, Imo Xiaobao thought that Ling Junhan was a soft little bun that could be bullied. Every time they met, it was either pinching or caressing. Yili suspected that Imo Xiaobao had transferred all his resentment from being bullied by his father to Ling Junhan. Every time she saw the white and soft little Junhan being bullied by Imo Xiaobao until tears welled up in her eyes but stubbornly refused to fall down, Yili's heart ached. However, Ling Junhan thought that Imo Xiaobao was a good brother. After being bullied, she would forget about it. The next time they met, she would still call brother Yuchen intimately. No wonder Imo Xiaobao called him Little Dazed Lang. Even Lang Haoyu, the father, could not help but cover his face when he saw that adorable look. How many sins did he commit to have such a dazed son? It's okay. Junhan has been spoiled too much by us. I don't know who she got her soft personality from. She can be placed in your house to help me train her well. Murong Ting waved her hand generously. The grand seat had made up her mind. As a slave to his wife, Lang Haoyu could only obey. However, he still had a bit of awareness as a father. He looked at Imo Xiaoyao and warned, "Don't let the little heir bully my son too much." Imo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows. Was this something he could control? He was Prince Ding, not a nanny to take care of a child. Ling heir, you don't think that I asked you to visit your family, do you? Looking at Lang Haoyu's conflicted look, Imo Xiaoyao said lightly. As an outstanding and capable subordinate, shouldn't he try to figure out every action and decision of his superior? Lang Haoyu was rushing to visit his family. Why was he so happy and worried that he could not bear to part with the child at home? Lang Haoyu lowered his head helplessly. He knew that it would not be so easy. I respectfully listened to Prince's instructions. Imo Xiaoyao curled his lips slightly and said, "There's no need for instructions. If the Northern Army takes a step into Redbud Pass within half a year, you don't have to come back. Go hang yourself in the southeast. In addition, I am a person who appreciates talent." Lang Haoyu's expression changed. He looked at Imo Xiaoyao with some joy. Imo Xiaoyao smiled but did not say anything. Lang Haoyu raised his voice and said, "Prince, don't worry. This subordinate will live up to Prince's painstaking efforts. Go. Your son doesn't have to worry. If you can't make it back in time, I can bring him back to the northwest. It just so happens that Mr. Qingyun is free now. He can teach you a thing or two." Lang Haoyu and Murong Ting were delighted. Ever since they had a child, they had always been stationed in the capital. In fact, this did not benefit Lang Haoyu's many subordinates, but he was worried about letting Murong Ting take care of the child alone. If Ling Junhan was brought back to the northwest, there was naturally no need to worry about her safety. Being taught by Mr. Qingyun personally was definitely a benefit that others could not ask for. Second young Master Lang obviously attributed young Master Mo's cleverness and wisdom to Mr. Qingyun's teaching. "Thank you, Prince." The next morning, Lang Haoyu and Murong Ting secretly went to Redbud Pass. The two of them were not valued in the Lang family, and not many people paid attention to them in the capital. Therefore, they did not attract much attention. Ling Junhan was sent to the Prince Ding mansion that night. Although she was a little hurt about leaving her parents, the 4-year-old baby was only a little. But after hearing the news that she would live with brother Xiaobao in the future, little Dazed Ling quickly forgot about her parents' departure and said that she would sleep with brother Yuchen in the future. Looking at his son's rare expression as if he had swallowed a fly, Prince Ding happily agreed to little Lang's request. He also signaled little Treasure Mo to take good care of his little brother and not let him suffer the slightest grievance. Chapter 602. Thus, the days in the Prince Ding mansion slowly passed as Imo Xiaobao and Ling Xiaobao chased each other around, bullied each other, and laughed foolishly. As for the news that came from time to time, such as the attempted assassination of the 10th prince before he ascended the throne, the Empress Dowager who did not want to be buried with him, and the secret clashes between the Lu family and the Li Palace, these were all ignored by the people in the Prince Ding mansion. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of the new emperor's ascension. Mo Jingqi's coffin had been moved to a side hall on the western side of the imperial city. Perhaps because Mo Jingqi never thought that he would die so early, Mo Jingqi's imperial mausoleum had not been completed yet. The time needed to build the imperial mausoleums could not be completed in a day. Therefore, Mo Jingqi could not be buried in a short period of time, and could only be placed in a palace for the time being. After the imperial mausoleum was completed, Zi Gong would be sent to the imperial mausoleum. The ascension of a new emperor in the Dechu state was always met with congratulations from all sides. Even when Mo Jingqi ascended the throne, the regent Mo Lufang had already passed away. The Dechu state still had Mo Xiuwen supporting it, and the famous young general Mo Xiuyao. The entire Dechu state was still relatively stable and strong. The surrounding countries, including Xiling, naturally sent envoys to congratulate him. This time, other than Nanzhao and the surrounding small countries sending envoys, there was no news from the neighboring Xiling and northern tribes. A 7-year-old emperor, and there were 2 opposing factions in court, each with their own thoughts. The Prince Ding mansion had already left the Dechu state. The 2 powerful countries, Xiling and northern tribes, did have the right to ignore them. Moreover, they were not in the mood to congratulate the new emperor of the Dechu state. They were coveting the fat piece of meat that was the Dechu state. The enthronement ceremony of the 10th prince was scheduled to be held on March 12, which was not a bad day. The Prince Ding mansion naturally received an invitation early on. A few days before the coronation, Yili was invited to the palace by the empress. This was not the first time Yili had seen the 10th prince. This child, who had originally lived like a shadow in a corner of the imperial palace, had suddenly been pushed to the most eye-catching place after Mo Jingqi's incident. In the past half a month, he had suffered a lot of fright. When Yili saw him, he was sleeping in his biological mother's arms. Just by looking at his sallow and emaciated face, one could tell that he had not been living well these days. Hearing Yili's footsteps, the 10th prince immediately opened his eyes. His blank eyes were filled with horror and fear. He whimpered and was about to cry. His birth mother hurriedly covered his mouth in panic and looked at Yili and the empress at a loss. The empress frowned and sighed helplessly, quickly let go of him. Princess Ding will not bicker with a child. The woman, who was wearing gorgeous clothes and had an ordinary appearance, finally carefully let go of the hand covering the 10th prince's mouth. She looked uneasily at Yili before softly coaxing the 10th prince in her arms. The 10th prince cried for a while and seemed to be tired. He then fell into a deep sleep again. The empress wanted someone to take him to rest, but was worried that she would wake him up again. Yili walked over and pressed on the 10th prince's acupuncture points a few times before saying in a low voice, "Take him to rest. Be careful, he won't wake up." "Many thanks." "Many thanks to Princess Ding." He thanked Yili with trepidation before taking the 10th prince into the back hall to rest. Seeing them leave, Yili raised her eyebrows and asked the empress, "What happened?" The empress smiled bitterly. What else could it be? This child. At first, I only thought that the 6th prince was arrogant and overbearing. He was spoiled and could not be a ruler. But this 10th prince. I am afraid that he is more troublesome than the 6th prince. It is also difficult for this child. He has only seen his father a few times in his life. His birth mother is also not someone who can teach him. He has been frightened a lot these days and has not been able to sleep well. Now, not to mention anything else, I am afraid that he will not even be able to cope on the day of the ascension. Seeing the empress' tired expression, Yili could only sigh. The 10th prince's birth mother was only a palace maid that Imo Jingqi had taken care of. She was originally from a poor peasant family and naturally could not teach the 10th prince anything. Although it was thought that because the 10th prince was about to ascend the throne, the people in the palace respectfully called her Empress Dowager. But that gorgeous dress could not change a person's temperament and ability. Wearing the gorgeous Empress Dowager's phoenix robe, it only made the small and unremarkable woman even more insignificant and uneasy. Right now, King Li and the officials of Hua country were supporting the outside matters, but the empress had to take care of the matters in the palace alone. If something happened to the new emperor at this time, even if the empress was not blamed, she would not be able to escape the crime of failing to protect the young emperor. No wonder the empress was so tired. Seeing the empress like this, Yili almost could not bear to talk about Feng Zhiyao. The empress saw that Yili was distracted and said with a smile, "Do you have something to say? We are not outsiders, just say it." Yili looked up and said in a low voice to her, "Feng San has returned." The empress stilled and looked down at the white jade bracelet on her wrist in a daze. Yili did not rush her and quietly sat at the side to drink tea. After a while, the empress came back to her senses and smiled apologetically at Yili, saying, "I have let you see a joke, for a while. Isn't he fine in the northwest? Why did he come back at this time?" Yili looked calmly at the empress and did not speak. The faint smile on the empress' face also gradually disappeared. Looking helplessly at Yili, she said, "For Wang Fei to come and tell me this, it must be. Wang Fei also knows about the matters of the past." Yili nodded and said softly, "The matters of the past are not your fault. Feng San's unwillingness to give up is his obsession, and it is also not your fault. If your highness does not care, I will tell him not to disturb your highness. But if your highness is not indifferent, why not give each other a chance?" Chance. The empress smiled bitterly and shook her head at Yili, saying, "Many thanks to Wang Fei. I know that Wang Fei is not someone who likes to meddle in other people's business. It is not easy for you to tell me so much. Wang Fei, please tell him. I only treat him like Xiuyao, a younger brother that I watched grow up. There is nothing else." Yili frowned and said, "He wants to see your highness." Originally, he wanted to enter the palace as soon as he returned to the capital, but the prince and I persuaded him not to. But if I bring back such an answer, I'm afraid that he will not be convinced no matter what. When the time comes, he still wants to see your highness." The empress shook her head and said, "There is no need to meet. Right now, the palace is heavily guarded and the new emperor is about to ascend the throne. I do not have the mind to think about these things. Wang Fei, tell him not to enter the palace. I do not have the time." Yili was silent. Not having the time was indeed a very good excuse to refuse. When a person did not even have the time to see you, it was naturally enough to show that they did not care about you. No matter from which aspect, the empress was an extremely intelligent woman. "What plans does your highness have in the future?" Yili asked with a frown. The empress was puzzled and looked at Yili. Yili pursed her lips and said with a faint smile, "If your highness wants me to persuade Feng San, you have to give me a reason. At least, you have to let him know that without him, your highness can live very well, or even better than with him, right?" The empress understood and said in a low voice, "When the new emperor ascends the throne, I will become the Empress Dowager of the Dechu state. Is that not enough?" "Maybe it is." Yili sighed and said. The two were speechless for a while. There was a commotion outside the door. "Impudent. Have the empress come out. Aijia wants to see her." "Empress Dowager, the empress is currently meeting with Princess Ding." "Empress Dowager, please wait a moment." The palace maid outside the door advised. "Impudent. Aijia is the Empress Dowager. Do I need to wait to see her?" The one surnamed Feng, come out for Ijia. Yili frowned and said in confusion, didn't they say they were going to be buried together? Why are they still making a fuss? Is noble consort Lu still here? The Empress said with a faint smile, the Lu family and the King of Qin don't agree with noble consort Lu being buried together. The key is that the Prince Regent's intention is also wavering. Since noble consort Lu is still alive, the Empress Dowager naturally can't be moved for the time being. Those families are still arguing with the court officials and those scholars. I heard that there is a saying that they will be buried together with the emperor when he is buried. It doesn't count as going against the posthumous edict. That has nothing to do with the Empress Dowager, right? The late emperor has been buried for almost 20 years. Who knows what they are thinking? For this kind of thing, anything I say is wrong. Just let them argue among themselves. Hearing the noise outside getting louder and louder, the 10th prince seemed to have been woken up again and began to sob. The Empress frowned and said loudly, invite the Empress Dowager in. It was quiet outside the door for a while. A moment later, the Empress Dowager led her people into the main hall. Looking at the Empress Dowager in front of her, Yili couldn't help but be shocked. She remembered that the first time she saw the Empress Dowager was in Zhangde Palace. The Empress Dowager was a dignified and noble mother of the country. But now, the Empress Dowager seemed to have lost her dignified and noble royal majesty overnight. White hair, frowning eyebrows that couldn't be covered by makeup, and the ferociousness in her eyes. She didn't look like the Empress Dowager of a country, but more like a fighting beast trapped in a cage. Chapter 603. Imperial Mother, what is the matter? Seeing the Empress Dowager come in with a group of people, the Empress frowned and asked. The Empress Dowager fiercely stared at the Empress and snapped, where is the 10th prince? The Empress calmly looked at the Empress Dowager and asked, the 10th prince. Imperial Mother, why are you asking this? The Empress Dowager coldly snorted, the 10th prince is about to ascend the throne. Ijia is his imperial grandmother. If I don't teach him, who else can? The Empress calmly refused, the new emperor has his tutor and court officials to teach him. Imperial Mother doesn't need to worry. Besides, the new emperor hasn't been registered yet. Imperial Mother is going to be buried with Imperial Father. It's not appropriate to meet. It was clear that the Empress Dowager had really angered the Empress these days. Otherwise, the Empress would never have said such a thing with her temperament. The Empress Dowager was so angry that her face turned green and white. Her hand trembled as she pointed at the Empress, presumptuous. Huasher, even though you are the Empress, you didn't leave behind a prince for the Emperor. Ijia thinks that the person who should be buried with him is you. The Empress Dowager was very jealous of the leisurely and graceful Empress in front of her. Even though the Empress didn't have a son, and even her only daughter was missing. But on the surface, no one could touch her. Not only because she was the daughter of the Hua family, but also because she was the Emperor's first wife. She was the D Empress of the Dechu state and the D mother of all the princes and princesses. No matter which prince ascended the throne, they had to respect her as the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager had to admit that even though she looked down on and hated noble consort Lu, she was the same as noble consort Lu. No matter how favored she was, no matter how many children she had. Without the title of the D wife, they didn't even have the right to refuse to be buried with the Emperor. The Empress lowered her eyes and calmly said, it's a pity that the Emperor didn't want I to accompany him before he died. Imperial Mother, Qinxia thinks that you should go back to the palace to rest. There are many things that Qinxia can't decide. Even the new emperor can't decide at this time. If Imperial Mother has something to say, it's better to go find Li Wang. The Empress Dowager gritted her teeth. Of course she wanted to find Imo Jingli. However, ever since the emperor passed away, Mo Jingli had never entered the palace to pay his respects to her. Even when he occasionally entered the palace, it was to visit the empress and discuss the ascension of the new emperor. By the time she received the news and rushed over, Mo Jingli had already left the palace. Now that the Empress Dowager's power had been stripped clean, it was very inconvenient for her to do anything. The Empress Dowager knew that Mo Jingli was determined to leave her alone. "Empress, what are you talking about? I just came to see the 10th prince." The Empress Dowager held back her anger and gritted her teeth. Since Imperial Grandmother wanted to see her grandson, she naturally had to let her see him. It just so happened that the 10th prince had also woken up. The Empress could only send someone to invite the 10th prince out. After the Empress gave in, the Empress Dowager sat down with satisfaction and drank the tea brought by the palace maid. Only then did he have the time to see Yili sitting beside him. The Empress Dowager didn't have a good impression of Yili. It wasn't that she had any opinions about Yili. It was that they had different standpoints from the start. And now, her life was hanging by a thread, while Yili had become Prince Ding's only wife. Princess Ding's name was as famous as Prince Ding's. How could the Empress Dowager, who had always boasted of being a heroine, feel comfortable? "Princess Ding," the Empress Dowager said with a frown. "Yes." "Greetings, Empress Dowager." Yili put down the teacup and gave a faint smile. She was sitting leisurely in the chair to the left of the Empress. She didn't look like a heroine whose name shook the world, but rather like an elegant and quiet lady. The Empress Dowager knew that there was nothing she could say to Yili, so she gave a soft snort and said no more. After a while, the 10th prince walked out after tidying up his clothes. Following behind him was naturally his birth mother. The 10th prince's birth mother's surname was Li. After giving birth to the 10th prince, she was titled Noble Lady Li. Now, everyone in the palace called her Imperial Concubine Li. Perhaps it was because she had been lowly since she was young, but she suddenly became the noblest woman in the world. Li Shi's fear and uneasiness were no less than the 10th prince's, so she would often act in a panic and tremble like a frightened bird. This kind of pettiness naturally couldn't enter the Empress Dowager's eyes. Looking at the trembling mother and son in front of her, the Empress Dowager gave a displeased snort. Li Shi jumped in fright and fell to her knees on the ground. This servant greets Empress Dowager." Li Shi had only seen the Empress Dowager a few times before, and she had only kowtowed from a distance. The Empress Dowager's status was noble, so she naturally wasn't someone a low-ranking concubine like her could come into contact with. When she suddenly heard the Empress Dowager's cold snort, she unconsciously knelt down. The Empress frowned in displeasure, but she was also very helpless. Li Shi's cowardice couldn't be blamed on her, but the new emperor's birth mother being so unpresentable was really a headache. When the 10th prince saw his mother suddenly kneel, he was also frightened and wanted to kneel as well. A lily-white hand gently supported his arm. Chapter 604. The 10th prince looked hesitantly at the jade pendant and turned to look at the Empress. The Empress was drinking tea with her head lowered. But he looked at his muffe, Li Shi, who was still wringing her clothes helplessly. How could she have the energy to care about him? In the end, he could only look at Yili. Yili laughed softly. "Do you like it? If you like it, then take it. Remember to thank Imperial Grandmother." "Grandson thanks. Imperial Grandmother." The 10th prince took the jade pendant and said thank you to Imperial Grandmother before hiding behind Yili again. The Empress Dowager, who had just put on a kind face and wanted to talk to him, grabbed empty air. Her face twisted again. The Empress saw this and controlled herself. Before the Empress Dowager got angry, she said lightly, "The 10th prince was frightened yesterday. If Imperial Mother is concerned about him, it is better to see him another day." The Empress Dowager had no choice but to leave angrily. Watching the Empress Dowager leave, Yili raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, "What happened to the Empress Dowager? Was she so frightened by the decree that she forgot to bring her brain out?" Seeing the Empress Dowager like this, Yili was really not used to it. In the past, even if the Empress Dowager was not unfathomable in her eyes, she still had some tricks up her sleeve. But to break into the Empress Palace like today and scare the new emperor who had not yet ascended the throne, it was simply a lowly trick. The Empress smiled and said, "The Empress Dowager was forced to lose her sense of propriety. After all, who would not panic when it comes to matters of life and death?" Yili frowned and said, "What about Li Wang? Does Li Wang really not care about the Empress Dowager?" The Empress shook her head and said, "I also don't understand the matter between mother and son. For example, she never understood whether the Empress Dowager loved her two sons or which son she loved more. And Li Wang and Mo Jingqi, the two brothers, Mo Jingqi, hated their own mother to the point of being unreasonable. This child is called Mo Suyun." Yili looked down at the timid 10th prince hiding beside her and asked, "The name is not bad. In fact, Mo Jingqi's son's name was not suitable. The name of the founding Prince Ding was Mo Lanyun. Although no one stipulated that the royal family had to avoid mentioning the prince's name, such a name still made people feel a little uncomfortable." The Empress looked at the 10th prince, and a trace of affection flashed in her eyes. She said, "It was the people of the imperial astronomer who obtained it." Mo Jingqi had never taken this pair of mother and son seriously. Naturally, they couldn't expect him to personally come up with a name. Yili looked at the pitiful child in front of her with some amusement. This child's courage was a little too small. Of course, it could also be because he had been frightened these days. Although Xiao Bao bullied Ling Junhan every day and called her Little Daisling, Ling Junhan was more than 10 times smarter and bolder than the child in front of her. No wonder the Empress was so worried. As an emperor, it was no good to be bold and spoiled like Mo Rueyun, but it was even more unacceptable to be scared to tears like the 10th prince, who might even sit on the throne. The former was barely able to keep up appearances, while the latter couldn't even keep up appearances. Looking at the 10th prince, the Empress sighed. Wearily, she said, "A great elder princess and the courtiers have handed him over to I, but how could I have the patience to change a child's temperament? This child has truly been taught to be too cowardly and timid." Yili smiled and said, "Princess Changle has been taught by your Imperial Highness to be intelligent and generous. Given time, the 10th prince will be better." The Empress smiled bitterly. "How can there be time? He can't even deal with the present. If the 10th prince really insists on not attending the ascension ceremony, then even if the Prince of Li and the Liu family propose to appoint a new emperor, it won't be unreasonable. At that time." What the Empress didn't say was that, at that time, this child and Madame Li wouldn't be able to survive. Regardless of which side gained the upper hand in the end, they would absolutely not allow the most legitimate heir to the throne to live in this world. "Then, your Imperial Highness's meaning is?" Yili looked at the Empress and asked softly. She didn't believe that the Empress didn't know that this was her best chance to escape. The chaos in the Chu Palace and the foreseeable future was not a problem that could be completely resolved by supporting a new emperor. The Empress sighed and said, "Let's take it one step at a time." Yili shook her head and sighed. "Why bother, Your Imperial Highness? Could it be that Your Imperial Highness really doesn't want to see Weo again one day?" The Empress's expression dimmed. Hearing Yili's words, she was slightly distracted. The Empress lowered her head and pondered. Yili didn't disturb her. Smiling, she looked at the 10th prince and asked, "Little Imperial Highness, how old are you?" The 10th prince blinked his eyes. Looking at the gentle and amiable elder sister before him, he timidly replied, 7 years old. His soft, childlike voice caused Yili to sigh. Her Xiaobao's speech had been very smooth. From the beginning, his voice had been very crisp and clear. She had never heard such a soft, childlike voice. It was truly a pity that such an adorable child had been pushed to such a position in the imperial palace. Little Imperial Highness, have you been afraid these days? The 10th prince's small body trembled. His face revealed a frightened expression. Clearly, he thought of what had happened these days. His eyes immediately filled with tears. Looking at Yili and nodding, Yili sighed and hugged his small body. She said, "Don't be afraid. There are many people who will protect Little Imperial Highness, do you know? In the future, Little Imperial Highness will become the Emperor of the Dechu state. Do you know what an emperor is?" The 10th prince raised his head and looked at Yili. He said, "I know. It's someone like Imperial Father. Your Imperial Father is not worth emulating. However, you also saw that your Imperial Father is very powerful, right? Everyone is afraid of him." The 10th prince nodded. Yili continued to smile and said, "So, Little Imperial Highness, you will become the new Emperor of the Dechu state. In the future, everyone will be afraid of you. So you don't need to be afraid of them. They won't dare to harm you." The 10th prince's voice carried a sobbing tone. But Wu-Wu, yesterday, Wu-Wu, Suyun was afraid." Yili hurriedly patted the 10th prince and softly coaxed him. Actually, she was not good at coaxing children. Mo Xiaobao did not need anyone to coax him. Ling Junhan, who was temporarily living in the Prince Ding mansion, was also a good child. "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Little Imperial Highness, you have to be brave. A brave child doesn't need to be afraid of anything. Only then will others not dare to bully you, do you know?" Perhaps Yili's comforting words were useful, or perhaps it was purely Yili's voice that made the child feel at ease. The 10th prince gradually stopped crying. He looked at Yili and said, "Elder sister. Will elder sister accompany Suyun?" Yili helplessly smiled bitterly. She could not accompany him. On the contrary, if this child really became an independent and outstanding prince in the future, they might even become enemies. However, looking at this soft and pitiful 7-year-old child in front of her, who could really harden her heart and ignore him. "I didn't expect you to be so good at coaxing children." The Empress had already returned to her senses. She only felt that it was very interesting to see Yili and the 10th prince communicating, so she just watched from the side. Looking at Yili, the Empress smiled and said, "Speaking of which, this child is very timid. This is the first time he trusts someone he has just met so much. Even though I have seen him so many times, he usually just salutes properly." Yili smiled and said, "It's probably because I have been taking care of children when I moved in, so I have more affinity with children." The Empress only thought that she was talking about Mo Xiaobao. She smiled and said, "If this child has the courage and intelligence of little Shitzi, then I don't need to worry." Yili lowered her head and touched the head of the depressed child. The child, who was already 7 years old, was not really unable to understand anything. He could still understand the disappointment and worry in the adult's tone towards him. Yili said softly, "This child is not stupid. It's not impossible for him to get better if he puts in more effort." But Yili looked at Madame Li, who was sitting aside in a daze, and frowned. It was not that she was heartless to disregard the relationship between mother and son, but Madame Li was really not suitable for educating children. Because she herself had a lot of things that she didn't understand and was powerless to do, she naturally couldn't not teach the child anything. All she could give the child was only doting. If the child was born in an ordinary family, it might not be a bad thing. At worst, the family would hand over a mediocre playboy or let Madame Li raise him. However, the 10th prince was born in the royal family and was in the teeth of the storm. A mother like Madame Li really couldn't give the child a suitable education. The Empress understood what she meant and nodded, saying, I see. I will discuss it with Great Elder Princess. Perhaps it's a good idea to invite Great Elder Princess to the palace to teach the 10th prince in person. After all, Great Elder Princess assisted 2 generations of former emperors and was known as the Iron Fist Princess. If it were another woman, she would naturally take this opportunity to raise the 10th prince in front of her. After all, although she was the empress, she was not the birth mother of the new emperor. In the future, when the new emperor took over the throne, his deep affection for his official mother and birth mother would determine his future life and honor. However, the empress didn't want to deprive the relationship between Madame Li and the 10th prince. She didn't have a son, but so what? It didn't mean that she would steal someone else's son. Just like her daughter, her Changel would always be her precious daughter. Your Majesty, you're right. Yili said with a smile. Yili was relieved that the Empress didn't raise the 10th prince. Although the Empress was unwilling to leave with Feng Jiao now, no one could be sure that she wouldn't figure it out in the future. If she had already developed a relationship with the 10th prince by then, it would be difficult to deal with. At that time, Yili wouldn't be able to explain it to Feng Jiao when she went back. Your Majesty. Madame Li said uneasily. Although she was stupid, she still understood that the Empress was dissatisfied with her. In the palace, the only person she could rely on was her son. In any case, she didn't want to be separated from her son. The Empress said indifferently, Don't worry. I just invite Great Elder Princess to the palace to teach the 10th prince. I won't separate you and your son. Thank you, Your Majesty. Hearing this, Madame Li breathed a sigh of relief and said happily. I will wait for you. Ling Junhan touched her little head and grinned innocently at Mo Xiaobao. It made Mo Xiaobao more embarrassed. Yili had enough of her son's embarrassed appearance. She waved to Ling Junhan with a smile and said, Junhan, come to Aunt. Ling Junhan cheered and threw herself in front of Yili. He smiled happily and rubbed against Yili's arms. He also liked Brother Xiaobao's mother very much. She smelled good, was warm, and as good as his mother. Unfortunately, Brother Xiaobao didn't like him pestering Aunt. Mo Xiaoyao stood behind Yili with a dark face. It was fine if it was only Mo Xiaobao, but now there were 2 brats hogging Yili. The time he spent alone with Yili every day was shortened by a lot. Thinking of this, Mo Xiaoyao began to regret his decision to send Leng Haoyu. Mo Xiaoyao began to regret his decision to send Leng Haoyu. Mo Xiaoyao said that Feng Jiao had a sense of propriety, but he didn't expect that Feng Jiao would get into big trouble that day. Late at night, it was already late at night. The entire Prince Ding mansion had already quieted down. Only the candlelight in the study was still lit. Mo Xiaoyao and Yili sat in the study, reading files and chatting from time to time. Although they seemed to be leisurely in the capital, there were still countless things that they needed to personally check every day. Even if they didn't need to make decisions immediately, they still needed to grasp the information to prevent any sudden changes. Feng San still hasn't come back from going out today. After reading the last file, Yili saw that there was still a large pile of files in front of Mo Xiaoyao. She casually picked one up and flipped through it as she asked. Mo Xiaoyao said, he probably went out to find a place to vent his anger. Feng Jiao looked casual and elegant, as if he was born with a good temper, but in reality, his personality was very clear. His happiness and anger were all displayed on his face. It was just that these years of experience had taught him to hide his emotions in front of others. Yili frowned slightly and said, I keep feeling that Feng San's mood wasn't right when he left during the day. He's waited for so many years. It would be strange if his mood was right. In reality, Mo Xiaoyao had never been optimistic about Feng Zhiyao's feelings for the Empress. When they were young, he had vaguely tried to persuade him a few times. But every time, it would end with the two of them punching and kicking each other until the sky turned dark. As they grew older, they learned to respect each other's feelings. It was not easy to persuade them. So it dragged on for so many years until Feng Zhiyao was already in his 30s. According to the age of an ordinary rich young master in this world, Feng San would be holding a grandson in 2 years. These two. Yili sighed. Before she finished speaking, she suddenly stood up from her chair. Someone broke in. Mo Xiaoyao beside her had already rushed out of the study like a wisp of smoke, leaving only his low voice, "Yili, go watch those two brats." Yili looked regretfully at the white figure that disappeared outside the door. This was the difference between a perfect qinggong and an ordinary one. When Yili arrived at the courtyard where Mo Xiaobao and Ling Junhan lived, Zhuo Jing was already waiting outside the door. When he saw Yili, he bowed and greeted, "Wang Fei." Yili nodded, "It's been hard on you. Are the two children all right?" Zhuo Jing said in a low voice, "This is this subordinate's duty. Little heir and young Master Lang are fine." As he spoke, Mo Xiaobao rushed out from inside. "Mother, what happened?" Yili saw a certain someone's sparkling eyes filled with eagerness. She raised her hand and patted his head lightly. "Be good and stay with Zhuo Jing. Take good care of Junhan. Mother will go to your Fuwang to take a look." Mo Xiaobao pouted in disappointment at not being able to join in the fun. But he still nodded obediently. "Then mother, be careful." Yili smiled, "You're so mischievous." After settling the two children, Yili rushed to the front courtyard. But she found that there was no fight. It was obvious that the person who broke into the Fu was someone they knew. Shaking her head, Yili turned around and walked towards the parlor in the front yard. However, what she saw in front of her made her head ache. In the reception pavilion, Feng Zhiyao was sitting on the ground. There was a pool of dark red blood beside him. The blood had not dried yet. It was obvious that someone had just vomited. Mo Xiaoyao stood in the middle of the hall with his hands clasped behind his back. The expression on his face was chilling. Yili did not doubt that it was Mo Xiaoyao's masterpiece that Feng Zhiyao was sitting on the ground and vomiting blood. But what gave her a headache was not only that. In the chair next to him, there was a person wrapped under a large black screen. Although the face could not be seen clearly, Yili could tell that it was a woman based on the body shape. What kind of person could a woman be that Feng Zhiyao would bring back in the middle of the night? Yili thought about it and felt her head hurt even more. Chapter 606. The woman in the chair was clearly still unconscious. Yili walked over and pulled back the cloak covering her face, revealing the woman's beautiful undignified face. Who else could it be other than the Empress she had just met today? Nonsense. Yili turned to glare at Feng Zhiyao as she scolded in a low voice. Feng Zhiyao didn't mind and hooked his lips into a smile. His normally teasing eyes were now filled with deep helplessness and sadness. Even Yili couldn't bear to say anything more. With a sigh, Yili asked, "Did she agree to you bringing her out like this?" Feng Zhiyao was silent. Yili understood that he had ignored the Empress' wishes and directly brought her out of the palace. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao become even angrier, Yili silently walked to his side and pulled his hand to the side to sit down. Otherwise, Yili couldn't guarantee that Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't give Feng Zhiyao another slap. "You've become quite daring. I never knew that young Master Feng was so daring." Sitting next to Yili, Mo Xiaoyao suppressed his anger and coldly said to Feng Zhiyao. Feng Zhiyao faintly smiled, but he didn't have his usual carefree and unrestrained air. Only a faint helplessness and dullness remained. "I'll take responsibility for what I've done. I won't implicate the Prince Ding mansion. Bang! Mo Xiaoyao slapped the table next to him. The table was fine, but the furnishings and teacups on the table instantly shattered. Mo Xiaoyao was so angry that he laughed. Good. Very good. Young Master Feng, you're so capable, but won't you implicate the Prince Ding mansion? Since you're so capable, why don't you just take her out of the capital? Feng Zhiyao was silent. The city gates were currently closed and the capital was currently under martial law. It was fine if he was alone, but it was impossible for him to bring an unconscious person out of the city. Feng Zhiyao closed his eyes tiredly. Xiaoyao, I'm sorry. But I don't regret it. Mo Xiaoyao snorted. Looking at him, he said indifferently, Young Master Feng San thinks you're smart. Didn't you think of a way out before you started? Did you enter the palace to kidnap people in a moment of impulsiveness? Feng Zhiyao was a little embarrassed. He really didn't think too much about it. After he had snuck into the palace to find the Empress, he had been rejected by the Empress. The more he thought about it, the sadder he felt. In a moment of anger, he didn't think about anything and returned to the palace to rescue her. But he didn't think that Mo Xiaoyao would be so angry, not because he went into the palace to kidnap the Empress, but because he didn't even have a plan before he kidnapped her. Then, what should we do now? Understanding Mo Xiaoyao's thoughts, Feng Zhiyao didn't force it. In terms of intelligence, he lost to Mo Xiaoyao by a lot. He could accept this fact. Yili raised an eyebrow and said with a slight smile, how about we send her back before anyone finds out? No. Feng Zhiyao quickly said. He had taken her out with great difficulty. If he sent her back, he couldn't guarantee that he would have the courage to do so next time. And he didn't bring her out just because of his feelings. It was more because he knew that her future in the palace wouldn't be easy. Even if she wasn't willing to accept him, he hoped that she could at least live a more relaxed and happy life. At least, he still had some hope, right? Mo Xiaoyao looked at the sky. It was already 5:00. He shook his head, it's too late. In at most an hour, someone will find that the Empress is missing. Yili frowned, then what should we do? Send her out of the city now. Right now, the sky wasn't bright yet. It wasn't a good time to leave the city. But if they missed this last moment. Once people found out that the Empress was missing, it would be even harder to leave the capital. She can't leave right now. We all know the Empress' personality. She isn't someone that just leaves. If we send her out now, she will come back on her own. Mo Xiaoyao shook his head, let's temporarily stay in the Prince Ding mansion. Even if the Empress is missing, no one will dare to search the Prince Ding mansion. Fortunately, the guards and servants of the Prince Ding mansion were all trustworthy and Feng Zhiyao had come back at night. Otherwise, tonight's matter would be like how Mo Jingli had kicked his son to death. Before the sky even brightened, the news would have spread to all the mansions in the capital. Many thanks to Prince, many thanks to Wang Fei, Feng Zhiyao said joyfully. Yili waved her hand and said, it's fine. Find a place to settle her down. You've been busy all day. Take advantage of the time to rest. Feng Zhiyao gave his thanks again. He picked up the sleeping Empress and turned to leave. In the flower pavilion, Yili turned to look at Mo Xiaoyao and said with a raised eyebrow, this is the propriety that Prince spoke of. He even dared to kidnap the Empress of a country. If this was propriety, then what was there that he did not know propriety? Mo Xiaoyao smiled helplessly. This is probably the first time in Feng San's life that he did not know propriety. Allowing Feng Zhiyao to settle the Empress, Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao did not go to visit. The two held hands as they returned to their own courtyard to rest. Less than 2 hours later, someone came to their door. Prince, Wang Fei, Duke requests an audience. Yili and Mo Xiaoyao exchanged a look. Mo Xiaoyao stood and said, "Invite Duqua to the study. I will go over now." Yili reached out to grab Mo Xiaoyao and said with a faint smile, "Let's go together." Mo Xiaoyao did not object. The two changed their clothes and went to the study. Duqua, who had been invited to the study, was discontented. His old face with white hair and beard was much more haggard. His slightly muddy old eyes were filled with anxiety and worry. Seeing Yili and Mo Xiaoyao walk in hand, he hurriedly stood to greet them. "Prince, Wang Fei." Mo Xiaoyao raised a hand to support Duqua. He said in a rare gentle voice, "Duke, why are you here so early? Is something the matter?" Duqua sighed and said with a bitter smile, "Isn't something big happening? Otherwise, why would this old man be so insensible as to come here so early in the morning?" The two of them helped Duqua sit down on either side before taking their own seats. Yili smiled faintly. "Old Duke, what are you saying? We'll always welcome you whenever you come to visit us. You haven't said what happened yet." "What happened?" Duqua was not in the mood to be courteous. He said in a low voice, "The Empress is missing." Although they already knew that Duqua would come here for this matter, they still didn't know how to say it. After a while, Yili slowly opened her mouth and said, "Old Duke. Her Majesty the Empress is in Ding Wangfu." Chapter 607. Hearing Yili's words, Duqua was stunned at first. He clearly didn't know how to react. Mo Xiaoyao didn't say anything either. He held his teacup and calmly waited for Duqua's reaction. After a long time, Duqua finally came back to his senses. He looked at the two calm people in front of him and said, "What's going on?" "Prince, you." Mo Xiaoyao put down his teacup and looked at Duqua apologetically. "This happened so suddenly that I didn't inform you. I'm really sorry." Duqua finally reacted after a long time. He sighed and glared at Mo Xiaoyao unhappily. "Who wants you to apologize? I just want to ask why you brought the Empress to the Prince Ding mansion for no reason. Does the prince think that there aren't enough people watching the Prince Ding mansion?" Hearing this, Yili smiled faintly. "I'm sorry for making you worry. It's true that we're young and inexperienced. We were impulsive." Duqua sighed and looked at Yili. "The prince and the princess aren't impulsive people. I won't ask why. Ask the Empress to come out. I'll try to send her back to the palace." Yili and Mo Xiaoyao looked at each other. They didn't expect Duqua to let them take the Empress away with just a few words. However, since Feng Zhiyao had taken the risk to bring the Empress out, they couldn't let Duqua take the Empress away before they could be sure that Feng Zhiyao couldn't persuade the Empress. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Duqua and calmly said, "That's why I said sorry to you, Duqua. I'm afraid I can't let you take the Empress back for now." "Why is that?" Duqua frowned and asked. The Empress being taken out of the palace by the Prince Ding mansion was really out of his expectations. The reason why he hurried to the Prince Ding mansion was because he wanted to use the Prince Ding mansion's power to investigate this matter. But he didn't expect such an outcome. Regardless of whether it was for his personal relationship with the Prince Ding mansion or for the relationship between the Dechu state and the Northwest, this matter could not be spread. Therefore, this decision could be said to be the best decision for everyone. He did not understand why Prince Ding and Wang Fei would object. Yili sighed helplessly. It seemed like Duqua didn't know about Feng Zhiyao. As a result, none of them knew what Duqua's reaction would be if he heard that it was Feng Zhiyao who took the initiative to kidnap the person. After thinking about it, Yili was about to say something when the Empress's voice came from the door. "I've made father worry. I'll go back with you now." The three of them turned their heads to look outside the door. The Empress, who had taken off her large cloak, appeared at the door in her bright yellow phoenix robe. The expression on his face was indifferent, and no one could tell what he was thinking. The Empress stepped into the hall, and Feng Zhiyao followed her in. If it's possible, our Hua family won't be willing. This old man understands Prince's meaning, but the Empress's identity is different from others. If it's discovered that the Empress is in the northwest, it will be a great blow to the Prince and the Prince Ding Mansion's reputation. Back then, how could Duke Hua be willing to marry his daughter to Mo Jingqi, who was still a prince? The Hua family's wealth had reached its peak. As long as he was still alive, no matter who ascended the throne, they would leave some face for the Hua family. A prince's wife or even the Empress was never a good thing for the Hua family. Unfortunately, the late emperor was worried that the Hua family and the Prince Ding Mansion were too close, so he forcefully tied the Hua family to the ship of Mo Jingqi, who was about to succeed the throne. If the emperor wanted his subjects to die, they had no choice but to die, let alone a mere arranged marriage. Duke Hua had always known of Feng Zhiyao's existence. However, he had never placed too much importance on Feng Zhiyao. It wasn't that he looked down on Feng Zhiyao, but Feng Zhiyao was, after all, several years younger than the Empress. When the Empress was married, Feng Zhiyao was still a half-grown child. Even if there was something going on, Duke Hua only treated it as a child's momentary infatuation. Thus, when Feng Zhiyao sneaked into Duke Hua's mansion on the night before the Empress's wedding, not only did he not make a move to capture him, he even allowed him to smoothly meet him. Otherwise, given that Feng Zhiyao was only 15 years old, how could it be so easy for him to break into the heavily guarded Duke Hua's mansion? Duke Hua naturally wouldn't say these things. He sized up the red-clothed man in front of him. Feng Zhiyao, who was already in his 30s, was no longer the thin youth who had left in the heavy rain. His handsome face now had a hint of calmness and elegance that hadn't been there in his youth. More importantly, Feng Zhiyao, who was the same age as Mo Xiuyao, didn't even have a concubine, let alone a wife. Duke Hua naturally knew why this was. No matter how one looked at it, Feng Zhiyao was undoubtedly the most satisfactory son-in-law candidate. It was just a pity. Sizing up the somewhat thin and haggard man who still couldn't hide his handsomeness, Duke Hua's eyes gradually turned into pity and helplessness. Chapter 608. Yili smiled faintly and said softly, "Old Duke, does the Hua family intend to support the new emperor?" Duke Hua was stunned. He did not expect Yili to ask such a question so directly. However, seeing Mo Xiuyao calmly drinking his tea without being offended, based on his understanding of King Ding's Fu and Mo Xiuyao, he shook his head and said bluntly, "I'm afraid that Duke Hua's Fu has the heart but is powerless." Although the younger generation of the Hua family was not a good-for-nothing, they did not have any outstanding talents. When he was still alive, he could help a little. But he was already over 80 years old. Who knew how many more days he could hold on? Once he passed away, not only would the Hua family, who supported the new emperor, be destroyed, but the new emperor they supported would also be unlucky. If so, after the new emperor ascends the throne, what will the queen do? What will the empress do? Yili asked. Duke Hua frowned. The queen was Mo Jingqi's wife. No matter which prince ascended the throne, they would have to respect her as the Empress Dowager. But Duke Hua also understood that although the 10th prince's birth mother was weak and useless, he was not afraid that the queen could not suppress her. But women in the palace were the most fickle. And if the 10th prince successfully took over the throne, the Hua family, who had been watching on the sidelines, would not have a good time. By then, the queen's life would not be easy. If something happened to the 10th prince, as the official mother, the queen would not have a good time either. Duke Hua looked at the queen hesitantly. All these years, he had always felt guilty towards this daughter of his. She joined the royal family for the Hua family. But at the same time, because of the Hua family, she could only maintain her appearance in the palace. She could never win her husband's heart and could not even have a son. The Hua family always knew that it was not that the queen could not give birth to a son, but Mo Jingqi was not willing to let the queen give birth to a son. "Father, you don't have to be like this. Your daughter has lived a glorious life. There is nothing wrong with it." Looking at the old man's guilty eyes, the queen smiled faintly. Tilting her head to look at Yili, who was sitting next to Mo Xiuyao, the empress smiled and said, "I know that Wang Fei is thinking for me, but some things are meant to be and cannot be forced." Yili frowned. Doesn't the empress want to see Chang'e again? Chang'e? Du Kuo's eyes widened. Chang'e is in the northwest. Although Du Kuo's mansion had sent people to protect his granddaughter, they did not return to Du Kuo's mansion for safety reasons. Therefore, Du Kuo only guessed that Chang'e had gone missing because she had been rescued and hidden by the people he had sent. He did not expect her to be in the northwest. Yili said with a smile, "Of course. Chang'e is a girl after all. How can I rest assured that she will be alone outside?" Du Kuo looked at the empress, then at Feng Zhiyao, Mo Xiuyao, and Yili. His snow-white brows were tightly furrowed. Before he could say anything, Zhuo Jing came in and reported, "Prince, Wang Fei, someone from Du Kuo's mansion is here. The Prince Regent wants to see the old Duke." Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and looked displeased. Mo Jingli is getting more and more arrogant. Du Kuo was not angry. He stood up and said, "Forget it. He was the Prince Regent personally appointed by the late Emperor. There is nothing wrong with summoning me. Sorry for disturbing Prince Wang Fei. I will take my leave now." With that, he walked out of the door. The Empress also stood up and followed Du Kuo out. Seeing this, Feng Zhiyao wanted to stand up. However, he felt an invisible pressure on his face, making him unable to move. He could only watch as the Empress stood up and left. Du Kuo, who had walked to the door, suddenly turned around and looked at the Empress, saying, "Stay in Prince Ding Mansion for a few days. I am not ready to send you back to the palace." "Father." The Empress frowned and said worriedly. Du Kuo did not give her a chance to refute, and said firmly, "That's it. You don't have to send me back." "Father, I..." Seeing Du Kuo leave, the Empress wanted to follow, but she heard a pff behind her. Feng Zhiyao spat out a mouthful of blood. "Ah Yao." The Empress was shocked. Feng Zhiyao smiled at her with difficulty, but the blood on his lips kept falling. Countless dark red flowers bloomed on his originally red brocade clothes. The Empress quickly went forward to support him. She glanced at Mo Xiuyao and said, "What happened? How did he get hurt so badly?" Mo Xiuyao did not care. He calmly drank his tea and said, "I didn't hit him hard last night. He didn't want to live anymore, right?" Last night, Mo Xiuyao did not hit him hard, so he added a bit of hidden energy. It was enough to force Feng Zhiyao to spit out blood, but not to the point of hurting him. "You..." The Empress frowned and glared at Feng Zhiyao with slight anger. Yili quickly said, "Empress, please help Feng San back to his room to rest. I'll have someone call a doctor over." Seeing Feng Zhiyao's face turn even paler after spitting out blood and his body on the verge of collapse, the Empress did not care about anything else. She could only help Feng Zhiyao out, completely forgetting that they could call someone to help. Seeing the Empress help Feng Zhiyao out with some difficulty, Yili asked her husband in confusion, "These two, can they do it or not?" Mo Xiuyao raised an eyebrow and said, "How would I know this? Du Kuo, I sent him away and kept the doctor for him. If Feng San still can't do anything, then let him die by himself. I am not his father. I don't have to think for him." Yili angrily pinched him and sighed, these two. She shook her head and did not know what to say. In fact, she somewhat understood the Empress's thoughts. Other than the responsibility of being the Empress, the women of this era were still bound by the idea of not having a second husband. Perhaps it was not difficult for her to give up the position of Empress, but it would be more difficult for her to accept Feng Zhiyao. Mo Xiuyao took her into his arms with a smile and said softly, "Don't worry. At least Feng Zhiyao should be able to persuade her to go to the northwest this time. After all, Chang'e is still in the northwest." Once the responsibility of being the Empress was removed, Chang'e was definitely the most important person to the Empress. As long as the Empress still wanted to see her daughter, there was no need to worry that she would not leave. But how to make her accept Feng San really had nothing to do with him. He was the prince, not the Yulao. Yili thought that Mo Xiuyao's words made sense. Even if they were thinking for the Empress, they should not interfere too much with her feelings. It was the Empress's freedom to accept whoever she wanted. It could not be said that because Feng Zhiyao had done the most for her, the Empress should accept Feng Zhiyao as a matter of course. And now it was much better than they had expected. At least Du Qua did not seem to want to take the Empress back to the palace. As long as Du Qua did not object, the Empress would have less resistance to leaving the capital. "Didn't you hit him too hard just now?" Yili thought of the blood that Feng Zhiyao spat out. It was real blood. It was not an act to deceive the Empress. Mo Xiuyao said carelessly, "Feng San has been depressed these days. He was seriously injured last night. It was a good thing that he spat out the blood. Don't worry about it." Really? Yili was a bit doubtful. Was it really not because Feng Zhiyao caused so much trouble and Mo Xiuyao took the opportunity to take revenge? Deep in the prince's mansion, in the courtyard covered by green trees, the Empress had already changed out of her gorgeous phoenix robe. The inconspicuous white robe made her look less noble and more beautiful. She also looked much younger. After sending away the doctor that had examined Feng Zhiyao, the Empress held the prescription that the doctor had left behind. Her brows were tightly knit. She thought of how the doctor had said that Feng Zhiyao had been depressed for a long time and was afraid that it would harm his life. Turning back to look at the pale-faced man lying on the bed with a heavy shadow under his eyes, the Empress' heart suddenly ached. In the end, she could only sigh and turn to find someone to boil the medicine. "Don't go." His clothes were pulled. Feng Zhiyao's voice was clearly weak. His eyes looking at the Empress were filled with hope, sadness, and caution. The Empress helplessly stood there for a while before finally giving in. She walked to the stool by the bed and sat down. Looking at him, she said, "Yao, rest well for a while. I won't go. When you fall asleep, I'll have someone boil the medicine." Feng Zhiyao was dissatisfied. "I can't go even if I'm asleep." The Empress was in a difficult position. She needed to find someone to boil the medicine. She didn't know if Yili did it on purpose or if there were really too few people in the Prince Ding mansion. There wasn't a single servant in Feng Zhiyao's courtyard. If she wanted to do something, she could only go personally or go outside the courtyard to find someone. Feng Zhiyao stubbornly stared at the Empress' face. He looked like he wouldn't close his eyes if she didn't agree. Seeing the Empress' worried frown, Feng Zhiyao said in a low voice, "I'm fine, the injury isn't serious. I don't need to take medicine." In reality, his injury really wasn't serious. After spitting out that mouthful of blood, his heart that had been heavy had relaxed a lot. But it really was very painful. Feng Zhiyao didn't need to think to know that he had been tricked by Mo Xiuyao in secret. But to be able to have this warm interaction, even if Mo Xiuyao had seriously injured him, he would only be grateful to him. "Nonsense, why aren't you taking medicine? Do you think you're still a child?" The Empress reprimanded softly. Feng Zhiyao smiled. He thought of when he was young. He was often beaten by Mo Xiuyao until he was covered in wounds but refused to apply medicine. The woman in front of him had also reprimanded him like this. Wait a while. You can't sneak away while I'm asleep. All right, rest well, the Empress said softly. The Empress said softly. She seemed to see the handsome and stubborn boy from more than 10 years ago. The Empress's expression softened a lot. Having received the promise, Feng Zhiyao finally closed his eyes in satisfaction. Chapter 609. The Empress had disappeared from the palace. This was definitely a huge matter that could shake the entire court. Although she didn't know why, Mo Jingli had sealed this news within a certain range. However, this did not stop the people who knew the news from secretly discussing it. Therefore, when Du Qua received the news and rushed into the palace, the people who met him along the way could not help but look at this old general with sympathy. When the previous regent Mo Lufang was still alive, and even when Du Qua was still young, the Hua family was extremely prestigious. Although the Prince Ding mansion was not the #1 family in Dechu State, it was definitely one of the top families. However, ever since Mo Lufang passed away and Du Qua became old, anyone with eyes could see that the Hua family was gradually being suppressed by the emperor. Even with the empress daughter, this situation did not improve. Now, the empress who was about to become the empress dowager had disappeared. How could people not feel sympathy? When Du Qua arrived, Mo Jingli was in the side hall of the Empress Palace. After receiving the news of the Empress' disappearance, he quickly rushed to the palace to confirm the news. After all, after the 10th prince ascended the throne, the Empress and the Hua family would have the easiest time taking the initiative. When that time came, it would be very disadvantageous for them. If the Empress really disappeared, the Hua family naturally would not have any excuse to participate in court politics. Du Qua was already old, and the remaining members of the Hua family did not have the qualifications. This old official greets the regent. Du Qua trembled as he bowed. Mo Jingli quickly went up and personally helped Du Qua up. I am very ashamed to have the old duke personally come to the palace. I hope the old duke will not blame me. Tears immediately flowed down Du Qua's old face. Prince is too serious. How could this old man not come when the empress suddenly disappeared? The poor empress. The Forbidden Palace is so strict, how could the empress? Mo Jingli's expression froze. He always knew that this old Du Qua was not easy to deal with. In just a few sentences, he had already pushed the blame to him. Now that the guards of the capital and the palace were in his hands, it was fine if Du Qua wanted to say that he was at a disadvantage. People might even suspect that he had done something to harm the empress. Old Duke, don't be impatient. I believe that imperial sister-in-law is blessed by the heavens and will definitely be able to turn her misfortune into a blessing. Old Duke, please sit down and talk. Even if he wished that the empress would never return, Mo Jingli had to say a few words on the surface. However, this kind of consolation was obviously useless to Du Qua. Du Qua was still choking with sobs as he muttered about the empress. The white-haired old man's face was covered in tears, and it was a pitiful sight. At this time, there were many people in the hall. Not only the high-ranking concubines in the Empress Dowager's palace, but even the prince of the imperial family had come. Looking at Du Qua's miserable state, the others did not have the heart to ask any more questions. However, the Empress Dowager did not have such scruples. She raised her voice and said, I heard that Du Qua just came out of the Prince Ding mansion. I wonder what you're doing at the Prince Ding mansion at this time. Everyone present looked at the Empress Dowager in surprise. It was as if the Empress Dowager had changed into a different person after the announcement of the edict. If the Empress Dowager originally had the demeanor of a scheming heroine, the Empress Dowager now looked more like an ordinary ignorant woman. Noble Consort Lu, who was sitting next to the Empress Dowager, had a faint smile on her lips. Compared to the Empress Dowager, she clearly had more advantages. Therefore, after the initial panic and shock, she quickly calmed down. She knew what to do to keep herself alive. Du Qua looked at the Empress Dowager with a sorrowful expression and said sadly, "Empress Dowager, please forgive me." This old official heard that the Empress had gone missing. In a moment of desperation, I went to the Prince Ding mansion to ask for help from Prince Ding. This old official did not consider it thoroughly. "Please punish me, Empress Dowager." Everyone was embarrassed. "You've already said so, who could blame you?" Moreover, before Mo Xiuya passed away, he had restored all the status and reputation of the Prince Ding mansion. Although Mo Xiuya was unwilling to accept it, as the officials of Dechu State, they could not pretend that they did not see it. With the status of the Prince Ding mansion, it was not impossible for Du Qua to ask for help immediately when the Empress went missing. Mo Jingli frowned slightly. He looked at Du Qua with a rare amiable expression and said, "Old Duke, you worry too much. Old Duke, you did not do anything biased in this matter. What crime have you committed?" "But I don't know what Prince Ding has to say." The Empress Dowager, who had been refuted by Mo Jingli, had a twisted expression but did not say anything more. Du Qua sighed and said, "It happened so suddenly. Prince Ding just received the news and has already sent people to investigate. I think there will be news soon." Everyone saw Du Qua's anxious and worried expression and did not ask anything more. Only Mo Jingli and a few relatives of the imperial family comforted him. After so many years, the Empress had done things properly. She still had some reputation in the imperial family. Du Qua only thanked them one by one and did not say anything else. "Old Duke, please wait." At the palace entrance, Du Qua was about to leave the palace and return to his residence when he was stopped by someone behind him. Turning around, Du Qua looked at the unfamiliar palace maid in front of him and said calmly, "What is it?" The palace maid looked to be about 14 or 15 years old. Facing Du Qua, who had spent his entire life fighting, she still had some status. She lowered her head and hurriedly said, "The imperial consort invites old Duke for a chat." Du Qua coldly said, "My Hua family has no relationship with the imperial consort. Presumably, there is nothing to chat about. Moreover, these are troubled times. It is inconvenient for this old man to rashly enter the harem." The palace maid saw that he was about to leave and hurriedly said, "Old Duke, please wait." The imperial consort said, "It is about the Empress. Old Du Qua, please go." Du Qua's face darkened. He coldly glanced at the palace maid and said with his hands behind his back, "Young lady, please lead the way." Finally, she completed the imperial consort's order. The palace maid secretly let out a sigh of relief. She hurriedly turned around and led Du Qua to see Imperial Consort Lu. The palace maid did not lead Du Qua to the palace where Imperial Consort Lu lived. Instead, she led him to an inconspicuous and remote palace in the Imperial Palace. They did not meet anyone along the way. Du Qua knew that Imperial Consort Lu was completely different from the Empress Dowager. Even now, Imperial Consort Lu still had deep connections and power in the Imperial Palace. In this case, Du Qua's heart sank. If Imperial Consort Lu really knew the truth about the Empress' disappearance, greetings, Imperial Consort. Imperial Consort Lu sat under the eaves of the palace that had been deserted for a long time. She still looked high and mighty, like a fairy in the sky. Du Qua had never liked Imperial Consort Lu. It was not because she was his daughter's rival in love. It was because when Imperial Consort Lu was still a young girl, she had a kind of indifference that came from her bones. It was as if no one in the world was worthy of her attention. He didn't know where Imperial Consort Lu got her arrogance from. She thought she was above all the other beauties in the world. However, that kind of arrogance made most people feel very uncomfortable. Therefore, Du Qua had also noticed Imperial Consort Lu's feelings for Mo Xiuyao. However, he had never thought highly of her. Prince Ding was a proud and arrogant young man. How could he take a fancy to such an arrogant woman, no matter how beautiful she was? Chapter 610. You may rise, Du Qua. Noble Consort Lu turned around and said indifferently. Du Qua stood up and asked bluntly, "May I know why your majesty has summoned me here?" Noble Consort Lu smiled faintly and looked at Du Qua, asking slowly, "Duke, how is the Empress?" Du Qua narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "Forgive me, I don't understand what you mean. If you really don't know, why did you come to see I?" Noble Consort Lu lowered her eyes and said, "If I don't have solid information, why did I invite you to see me? It's a coincidence. Last night, a girl from Ai's palace passed by the Imperial Garden and happened to see a person leaving the palace with something. She saw a corner of that thing. It seemed to be the phoenix brocade that only the Empress could wear. More coincidentally, the girl didn't know that person, but she described her to I had some impression of her." Du Qua said coldly, "I don't know what you're talking about. If that's all you want to say, please forgive me for leaving." Du Qua cupped his hands and turned to leave. Noble Consort Lu's cold eyes flashed and she sneered, "The Empress is now in the Prince Ding mansion, isn't she? It was Feng San who took the Empress away last night. Du Qua, do you really not care at all?" Du Qua turned around and sneered, "Since you're so confident, why don't you directly report it to King Li and the Empress Dowager? Instead of worrying about the Hua family and the Empress, why don't you worry about yourself, Noble Consort Lu? The late Emperor's edict is not so easy to change." Noble Consort Lu's face darkened. Du Qua was warning her that if she interfered with the Empress's affairs, the Hua family had many ways to make the royal family carry out Mo Jingqi's edict immediately. In fact, it was not easy for Mo Jingqi's edict to be delayed until now. It was just that Mo Jingqi hadn't been buried yet and the new emperor hadn't ascended the throne. With the Lu family and King Li around, no one mentioned the burial for the time being. But it had already been announced to the world. Sooner or later, the idle scholars would definitely mention it. If the Hua family interfered, it would be even more difficult to handle. Noble Consort Lu watched as Du Qua turned around and left. The peach blossom in her hand was crushed into pieces. The light red flower juice stained her jade-like hand. In the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiuyao received a message from Du Qua. He frowned and threw the letter on the table. Yili picked it up and looked at it. She frowned and said, "How did Noble Consort Lu know about this? To be able to kidnap the Empress out of the palace without a plan, do you expect him to have any rationality left?" It wasn't surprising that he was discovered. Besides, "I'm afraid Noble Consort Lu has an expert by her side," Mo Xiuyao said. "Master?" Yili asked curiously. He was sitting in the Prince Ding mansion. Even if Mo Jingli really suspected that the Empress was in the Prince Ding mansion, would he dare to come in and search? Besides, Mo Jingli probably wanted them to take the Empress away so that he could have something against the Hua family and prevent the Hua family from causing trouble for him in the future. Mo Xiuyao had no intention of interfering in the affairs of the capital, so he didn't care about most of the things. But Feng Zhiyao and the Empress meant something different to him. Since Feng Zhiyao had brought them out, he naturally didn't mind spending some effort to take them away. Yili frowned and said, "No matter what, it's uncomfortable to have someone peeping in the dark." Mo Xiuyao smiled and said, "Since Miss Li feels uncomfortable, then we'll just deal with him. Princess Consort. Something has happened." Just as they were speaking, Zhuo Jing rushed in and reported without even bowing. Mo Xiaoyao raised an eyebrow. What is it? The Feng family has been raided. Zhuo Jing reported. Mo Xiaoyao faintly glanced at Zhuo Jing and asked, what is this? Although the Feng family was one of the 4 wealthiest families in Great Chu and was also Feng Jiyao's family did not dare to offend them. But they weren't people of the Prince Ding mansion. Therefore, it didn't matter to Mo Xiaoyao whether or not the Feng family was raided. Zhuo Jing was also a bit embarrassed. As soon as he received the news, he quickly came in to report. He forgot that the Feng family had nothing to do with the Prince Ding mansion other than their relationship with Master Feng San. Yili smiled faintly and said, forget it. Let's tell Feng San. After all, he is his biological father. Zhuo Jing agreed. Before he turned to leave, Feng Zhiyao had already appeared outside the door and said faintly, no need. I already know. Feng Zhiyao and the Empress walked in one after the other. Their expressions were not good. Clearly, Feng Zhiyao had rushed over after hearing about this. His face was still a bit pale, but the sadness in his eyes had dissipated a lot. Feng Zhiyao looked apologetically at Mo Xiaoyao. Prince, Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand and smiled a bit fakely. No need to apologize to I. Right now, no one in the Chu capital dares to cause trouble for I. If you don't feel guilty towards the Feng family, let's go back to Li City. Feng Zhiyao smiled bitterly. He didn't have any feelings towards the Feng family. But it wasn't to the point where he could ignore the Feng family being raided. In the end, he didn't have any deep hatred towards the Feng family. He just chose a different path. This time, the Feng family was truly implicated by him. This subordinate will definitely take care of this matter. Feng Zhiyao said in a low voice. Mo Xiaoyao squinted and said, how do you want to take care of it? After robbing the palace, do you want to rob the prison again? Or do you want to walk right into the trap and say that it was you, young Master Feng San, who robbed the Empress? Feng Zhiyao looked speechlessly at the lazy white-clothed white-haired man in front of him. They had known each other for a few decades. He understood Mo Xiaoyao well enough. He was saying this to help him take care of the problem. But Feng Zhiyao's heart was very uneasy. This matter was indeed caused by him being too impulsive. If he had endured and come back to discuss with Mo Xiaoyao might not have stopped him. He might even have helped him. Now that he had made a mistake, he needed the Prince Ding mansion to take care of it for him. This made Feng Zhiyao secretly regret his impulsiveness. Don't act like this in front of I. Bring Tan Jiji to the Prince Ding mansion in 3 hours. Otherwise. He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat was self-evident. Feng Zhiyao's spirit was shaken. He said loudly, this subordinate obeys. I'll go immediately. He looked back at the Empress sitting on the side. The Empress smiled faintly and said, you go do what you need to do. I'll talk to Prince Ding and the princess. Hearing this, Feng Zhiyao's face lit up. His tone was a lot lighter. He looked at the Empress and said, wait for me. I'll be back soon. After speaking, he walked out of the parlor with light steps. It didn't look like he was injured at all. Seeing the bright red brocade clothes disappear at the door, the Empress sighed helplessly. She looked apologetically at Yili and Mo Xiaoyao and said, I've troubled you. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, Feng San has been enslaved by I for more than 10 years. It's not a big deal to occasionally help him solve some problems. I don't want to hear anything else. It's better to wait for Feng San to come back. If he comes back and you're gone, I'm afraid I'll have one less capable fighter. The Empress couldn't help but smile. She shook her head and said, after so many years, your friendship with Yao hasn't changed. Thank you for taking care of him all these years. Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand indifferently and said, Feng San isn't just a subordinate of the Prince Ding mansion. He's also a brother that I grew up with. Maybe Su Qingchen was more intelligent than Feng San. Maybe Zhang Qilan and the others were better at fighting than Feng San. But only Feng San was a brother that grew up with him. He was a brother that accompanied him through the most painful years. There weren't many friendships like this in life. Maybe there were a few in the past. But after so many years, only Feng Zhiyao hadn't changed. Chapter 6:11. Although most of the Prince Ding mansion's power had left the capital for a long time, when Mo Xiaoyao truly wanted to find someone, it was very easy. After all, the Prince Ding mansion had operated in the Chu capital for close to 200 years, not 10 or 8 years. The depth of its foundation was not something that Tan Jiji, a descendant of the previous dynasty who could barely walk in broad daylight, could understand. Therefore, when Tan Jiji was politely invited to the Prince Ding mansion by the people of the Prince Ding mansion, he still couldn't hide his shocked expression. In the main hall, Mo Xiaoyao stared at the middle-aged man in the hall with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, Young Master Tan. How do you think I should greet you this time? Or, do you have something that you can use to exchange for your life with I? Hearing this, Tan Jiji really didn't want to argue. For someone like Mo Xiaoyao, once he decided on the result, no matter how you argued, it was meaningless. However, he had to work hard for his name. After all, he wasn't tired of living. He smiled helplessly and said, The Prince Ding mansion's foundation is indeed deep. I have nothing to say about it falling into the hands of the prince. It's just, I don't know what I've done to anger your highness. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Tan Jiji with interest. He raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, Could it be that young Master Tan thinks that I called you here to drink tea? Tan Jiji sighed. Of course he knew why Mo Xiaoyao called him here. He just didn't think that he would be found so quickly. Sighing, Tan Jiji said straightforwardly, I can't do anything about what the prince said. Although the idea came from me, I really can't do anything about the Dechu State's court right now. Therefore, young Master Feng San, please forgive me. After speaking, Tan Jiji cupped his hands in apology to Feng Zhiyao, whose face hadn't changed since he saw him. Feng Zhiyao sneered and ignored Tan Jiji. Tan Jiji also didn't care much and sat calmly drinking tea. Mo Xiaoyao leaned against the back of the chair, seemingly leisurely sizing up Tan Jiji. However, even though Tan Jiji looked calm on the surface, his heart was actually stretched taut. Mo Xiaoyao's gaze on him seemed ordinary, but in reality, the pressure he felt was no different from a real sword. He knew that now that he had fallen into Mo Xiaoyao's hands, his life or death would depend entirely on Mo Xiaoyao's mood. After a while, Mo Xiaoyao seemed to have seen enough before slowly retracting his gaze. His lips curled into a mocking smile. Young Master Tan, are you here chatting idly with I? Are you waiting for someone to save you? Tan Jiji was stunned. The smile on his face became even more bitter. Since I've already fallen into the prince's hands, I don't dare to think about it. He truly didn't have much hope for those people. Tan Jiji had always been proud of his foresight. Compared to Mo Xiaoyao's scheming people in the Chu capital, he was far inferior. Falling into Mo Xiaoyao's hands wasn't a loss. After all, he had helped Mo Xiaoyao plot against Mo Xiaoyao many times. In fact, he had almost been able to completely destroy the Prince Ding mansion. He just couldn't accept it. He had great ambitions all his life, but in the blink of an eye, he was almost 40 years old and still hadn't accomplished anything. Now that he had fallen into Mo Xiaoyao's hands, his chances of survival were even slimmer. Mo Xiaoyao naturally saw the unwillingness in Tan Jiji's eyes. He looked at Tan Jiji with a smile and said, young Master Tan, are you unwilling to accept that all these years of hard work have been for nothing? I'm afraid it's not for nothing. Instead, it's for someone else. Tan Jiji glanced at Yi Li, who had been sitting silently beside Emo Xiuyao. He said with some annoyance, speaking of which, it seems that ever since the prince married the princess, the Prince Ding Mansion's fortunes have changed. Rather than saying that he's making things difficult for the Prince Ding Mansion, it's better to say that he wants the Prince Ding Mansion to openly cut ties with the Dechu state. Emo Xiuyao raised his brows and smiled at Yi Li. He turned to look at Tan Jiji with some regret. If it weren't for those things in the past, I really hope that someone like young Master Tan can stay in the Prince Ding Mansion. Actually, young Master Tan, you don't need to be upset. Even if your original plan succeeded, the person who would have the last laugh wouldn't be you. Because, you've walked in the wrong direction from the start. Look at Rin Qining. Does young Master Tan still not know the difference between you and him? Tan Jiji's expression changed. If there was anything in this world that was a sore spot for someone like Tan Jiji, it was without a doubt Rin Qining. Ever since Rin Qining appeared as a descendant of the previous dynasty and with the identity of Lin Yuan, Tan Jiji had felt very uneasy. There was only one Lin Yuan. If Rin Qining was an orphan of the previous dynasty, then what was Tan Jiji? If he wasn't a descendant of the previous dynasty, then what was the purpose of his actions in the past half of his life? Tan Jiji didn't look for Rin Qining, nor did he look for Dr. Lin to ask. Because he faintly felt that the answer was something he didn't want to see. It seems that this matter doesn't need the prince's concern. Tan Jiji said with an ugly expression. Emo Xiuyao raised his brows and said, indeed, it has nothing to do with I. Whether it's you or Rin Qining, I have never placed them in my eyes. Prince, you're too confident. Don't forget how miserable the Prince Ding Mansion was when it fell. Logically speaking, Tan Jiji knew that he definitely didn't dare to talk back to Emo Xiuyao. But when he saw Emo Xiuyao's nonchalance and indifference, the anger in his heart couldn't help but rise. The most infuriating thing wasn't that you couldn't win against your enemy, but that your enemy had never placed you in his eyes from start to finish. So, young Master Tan and Emo Jingqi have clearly done something stupid. Could it be that you think that if the Prince Ding Mansion wasn't a subject of the Dechu state, with Emo Jingqi's insignificant ability, he would be able to scheme against my big brother? Back then, the heir of the Prince Ding Mansion, Emo Xiuan, although he didn't have the same reputation as his younger brother, he was indeed one of the people that Emo Xiuyao respected the most. To be able to convince someone like Emo Xiuyao, it definitely wasn't something that could be done with just the identity of an older brother. And now, in this world, who can stop me? Tan Jiji snorted lightly, his eyes revealing his disbelief. But that gaze was somewhat deliberate and forced. Emo Xiuyao didn't mind and waved his hand to have someone take him away. Tan Jiji still had some use, so he didn't have to kill him for now. But he definitely wouldn't let him escape from his hands a second time. Feng Zhiyao rudely took Tan Jiji, whose martial arts had been restrained, away, leaving only Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao sitting opposite each other in the hall. Yi Li unhurriedly replaced the cold tea and poured a new cup of hot tea. She smiled at the white-haired man sitting opposite her and asked, Prince, do you have any plans? Someone like Tan Jiji. Tan Jiji wasn't a big deal. He had fallen into the hands of the Prince Ding Mansion and had his martial arts restrained. As long as he was still in the Prince Ding Mansion, even if he was thrown into jail, he wouldn't be able to leave the Prince Ding Mansion, let alone find out any news. But Yi Li remembered that Dr. Lin was still in the northwest. Last time, when she went back, she didn't ask Dr. Lin about Tan Jiji. After so many years of interaction, and the kindness of saving her life and teaching her, Yi Li really treated that old man as a family member. She didn't want to make the old man too sad. Chapter 6:12. He's just a clown. Mo Xiaoyao said blandly, "Don't worry, Li Li. I will take care of the relationship between Tan Jiji and Dr. Lin." Yi Li nodded. As long as Mo Xiaoyao promised something, he was always very reliable. After a little consideration, she threw it to the back of her mind and said to Mo Xiaoyao, "There's nothing to do in the capital. Let's go back to the northwest." She was afraid that if she delayed any longer, her big brother would really get angry when they got back. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and smiled happily. "We took care of the Feng family's matter this time. The matter of the new emperor ascending the throne should have come to a conclusion. Then let's go back to the northwest." Although Mo Xiaoyao threw most of the work to Su Qingchen from time to time, he still knew that going too far was as bad as falling short. If he squeezed too much and Su Qingchen ran away, then the gains would not make up for the losses. The Feng family was very unlucky this time. Although it was said that scholars, farmers, businessmen were the worst, businessmen who were able to reach the Feng family's level were definitely more glorious than most people. What's more, the Feng family was the only one among the 4 richest families in Dechu state that had a foothold in the capital and had some relations with the imperial family. Normally, everyone would give them some face. However, ever since the emperor passed away, the Feng family was divided into several factions. They quarreled endlessly over which side to support. Before they could reach a conclusion, the Feng family had already been cleanly raided. They didn't even have time to figure out why they were raided. The family of hundreds of people were locked up in the capital's Supreme Court's prison. As the saying goes, when the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. The Feng family had been raided without any warning. From top to bottom, everyone was thrown into prison. Those who had a good relationship with them would naturally avoid them like the plague, not to mention those who were waiting for the Feng family to fall so that they could get a share of the profits. How could there be anyone to take care of them? The noble madams, young masters, and young ladies who were originally living a life of luxury were suddenly thrown into a dirty and dark prison. Naturally, they would cry endlessly. The head of the Feng family, Feng Zhiyao's biological father, Feng Huiting, was locked in a solitary cell. Compared to the crying of his wife, concubines, children, and the other members of the Feng family, he was much calmer. He only leaned against the wall and sat in the corner of the cell. He didn't even respond to Madame Feng's calls. As soon as Feng Zhiyao entered the Supreme Court, he was stopped. Originally, according to the orders from above, although Feng Zhiyao's relationship with the Feng family was cold, he was still a concubine son of the Feng family. He would definitely be imprisoned. However, Feng Zhiyao had another identity. He was Prince Ding's confidant and the deputy general of the Mahist army. The person who went to arrest them did not dare to go to the Prince Ding mansion personally to arrest them. He could only report it to his superiors, but in the end, the matter was left unsettled. However, it was impossible for young Master Feng San to enter the Supreme Court to visit the Feng family. Feng Zhiyao gloomily stared at the Supreme Court official with a fake smile in front of him. After the Feng family was thrown into prison, he had been busy capturing Tan Jiji. He only had time to visit after completing Prince Ding's orders. However, he was blocked outside the door. It was easy to imagine how bad Feng Zhiyao's mood was as he had not slept for 2 days. "Get out of my way." Feng Zhiyao was cold. His usually elegant smile was dyed with a bit of cruelty, but it made the person in front of him shiver involuntarily. "Young Master Feng San, for Prince Ding's sake, the court is already gracious to not make things difficult for you. Don't fail to appreciate kindness." Perhaps it was because he realized that he had been so casually frightened by a junior, the old man in front of him was anxious to regain his lost face and spoke righteously. Feng Zhiyao disdainfully snorted, "If you have the ability, then lock this young master up as well." This young master has never heard of the Supreme Court not allowing people to visit the prison. It was true that the Supreme Court did not allow people to casually visit the prison, but there were still some hidden rules in the officialdom. As long as one had money, there was no place that was inconvenient to go except the imperial palace. However, Feng Zhiyao did not plan on giving money. He looked at the righteous old man with a smile that was not a smile. Do you need this, young master, to tell the people from the censorate how much benefits official Wang has received in the Supreme Court in the past 7 years? Official Wang's expression changed. He glanced at his subordinates who had their heads down and pretended not to hear anything. He stared at Feng Zhiyao for a long time before dryly coughing and saying, "Since young master Feng San is a member of the Prince Ding mansion, this official naturally cannot come. I have come to ask young master Feng San to quickly come out." Feng Zhiyao coldly laughed and said, "This young master coming here has nothing to do with the Prince Ding mansion." After saying this, he did not care about official Wang's expression and walked into the prison with a wave of his sleeve. As soon as he walked into the prison, he was greeted with a cold and rotten aura. Both sides of the corridor were filled with pairs of filthy black hands that wanted to pull on passers-by. Feng Zhiyao lightly snorted. His sharp eyes swept to the sides and the prisoners who wanted to pull on him immediately withdrew their hands. People who had been in prison for a long time had the instinct to seek good fortune and avoid harm. Even if Feng Zhiyao's appearance was handsome and luxurious, like a distinguished young master from a prestigious family, the evil aura accumulated from over a decade of war was not something these prisoners could resist. The Feng family members were locked in the innermost part of the prison. Before he even stepped in, he could smell the strange stench coming from inside. Feng Zhiyao could not help but knit his brows. His half-closed eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. Walking into the place where the Feng family members were locked up, Feng Zhiyao's expression was complicated as he looked at the man resting in the innermost cell. Feng Huiting, who was almost 60 years old, looked much younger than his actual age. Even in this dark and dirty cell, he was much neater than the crying and noisy Feng family members in the next cell. Feng Zhiyao found that compared to when he left the capital many years ago, there was much more white hair on his temples. 6 years ago, when Feng Zhiyao returned to the capital, he did not listen to Su Hongyan's advice and went back to see him. Thinking about it, the father and son had already seen each other every day for 7 or 8 years. Feng Zhiyao closed his eyes and hid the unnecessary emotions in his eyes. Feng Zhiyao's sudden appearance caused the noisy Feng family members to immediately quiet down. The red-clothed man standing in the corridor was wearing a luxurious red brocade robe. No matter where he was, his handsome and outstanding appearance caused the dark cell to suddenly light up. The Feng family members were not familiar with Feng Zhiyao. Since Feng Zhiyao was 8 or 9 years old, he had spent more time in the Prince Ding mansion and outside than at home. But looking at the red-clothed man in front of them, someone finally remembered that many years ago, there was a Feng family member who was always dressed in red no matter where or when. It was Unknown who suddenly called out, "Feng Zhiyao. Big brother, second brother, long time no see. How have you been?" Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows and showed a slightly malicious fake smile to the 2 middle-aged men not far away. No matter how many years had passed, Feng Zhiyao still could not like his 2 brothers. When he was a child, they were existences that he envied and feared. When he was a teenager, they were the objects of his disgust and hatred. But now, Feng Zhiyao, who had long matured, had already left these 2 brothers far behind him. The hatred that he thought was deep in his bones when he was a teenager was now only a faint instinctive disgust. "Feng Zhiyao. Why are you here?" The second son of the Feng family, Feng Ziyuan, stared at his 3rd brother who he had not seen for many years and asked with some displeasure. The grudges when they were young were probably just children who did not know how to behave, but the grudges when they were young were more related to interests. At that time, the Feng family forced the head of the family to drive Feng Zhiyao out of the Feng family because he was close to the Prince Ding mansion. After Feng Zhiyao followed Prince Ding to the northwest, they publicly broke off their relationship with him. But now, Feng Zhiyao was like a fish in water in the Prince Ding mansion. On the contrary, they were reduced to this state. The faces of the two sons of the Feng family were not very good. Third brother. Third brother. Save me, it's none of my business. Save me. A middle-aged woman scrambled to the railing and reached out to grab Feng Zhiyao's clothes as she cried. Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows. The Liu family and Prince Li were well prepared. Not only did they capture the people of the Feng family, but they even captured their married daughter. It didn't seem like they were just threatening him and the Prince Ding mansion. Thinking of Mo Xiaoyao's casual smile when he was about to leave, Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows. What are you doing here? When Feng Ziyuan called out Feng Zhiyao's name for the first time, Feng Huiting opened his eyes and looked at the luxurious man in red outside. An inexplicable emotion flashed through his eyes, but it quickly disappeared as he asked calmly. The cold voice made Feng Zhiyao's heart feel stifled, but the smile on his face became more and more brilliant. Of course I'm here to see you, father. You look good. Meddlesome. Feng Huiting said coldly, you are no longer a descendant of the Feng family. Whatever happens to the Feng family has nothing to do with you. I don't need you to come and visit me. If there's nothing else, go back. After speaking, Feng Huiting closed his eyes again and ignored Feng Zhiyao's changed expression. Father, what are you talking about? The Feng family's fourth young miss next to him said with dissatisfaction, third brother is Prince Ding's confidant. Third brother must be here to save us. Third brother. Let me out quickly. Feng Zhiyao originally felt a little guilty, but after being provoked by Feng Huiting's cold words, anger suddenly surged in his heart. He sneered and pulled back his clothes that were grabbed by Feng Xi. He raised his eyebrows and smiled, sorry, as Master Feng said, I'm no longer a member of the Feng family. What happens to the Feng family has nothing to do with me. Right now. I'm just here to watch the show. Little bastard. Even if the Feng family is in dire straits, it's not your turn to gloat. Maybe the Feng family was harmed by a slut like you. The Lady Feng on the side suddenly cursed. Hearing this, Feng Zhiyao looked at the Lady Feng with some surprise. The Lady Feng had always relied on her status as the official wife. Although she never looked at a bastard like him, she always had a magnanimous and virtuous appearance on the surface. She would never do anything that would cause people to gossip. Aside from her two sons bullying her and pushing them out without leaving a trace, the Lady Feng was really not bad compared to the vicious and merciless women in the inner residence. He didn't think that she would be unable to hold back at this time. Shut up. Feng Huiting suddenly spoke and coldly said, filthy words. Could it be that after going to prison, your manners were all eaten by dogs? The Lady Feng choked. She opened her mouth but couldn't say anything for a long time. Chapter 613. Coldly looking at Feng Huiting and Madame Wang, Feng Zhiyao snorted and turned his head away in disdain. It had always been like this. Ever since he was a child, his father only cared about his official wife and son. No matter how hard he tried, he was always ignored. Feng Zhiyao suddenly felt angry and powerless. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. A graceful white figure flashed through his mind. Feng Zhiyao's eyes, which had a trace of resentment, suddenly became much gentler. Yes, even without the Feng family, he still had other things. Mo Xiaoyao, who grew up like a brother, and his colleagues and comrades in arms, whom he had known for many years. Perhaps, soon, he would have his own family. Thinking of the graceful figure in the Prince Ding mansion, the depression in Feng Zhiyao's heart suddenly dissipated. He raised his head and looked proudly at Feng Huiting in the corner. I have already reported to the prince. You can come out soon. In the future, humph. In the end, he didn't say anything decisive. Feng Zhiyao snorted and turned to walk out. So what if they were implicated by him? His head must have been clamped by a door for him to feel guilty. Save them, and in the future, they wouldn't owe each other anything. Feng Whiting silently watched the red figure turn and leave. In the dark corner, a trace of relief flashed through his old eyes. Noble consort Nyang Nyang has arrived. The Prince Regent has arrived. Feng Zhiyao hadn't taken a few steps when a loud report came from the door. Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows. It was one thing for Mo Jingli to come, but even noble consort Lu had come. It seemed that Du Qua was right. Not only could noble consort Lu move freely in the palace, she could even leave the palace at will. It seemed that she had really grasped Prince Li's major weakness. Not in a hurry to leave, Feng Zhiyao turned and slowly walked back. On the other side of the cell, noble consort Lu in white looked at the dirty environment in front of her and frowned in disgust. No amount of incense could cover up the stench in the cell. Noble consort Lu looked at Mo Jingli beside her and said unhappily, I really don't understand. Why do you have to come to a place like this in person? Mo Jingli said indifferently, I don't seem to have asked noble consort Lu to come. Noble consort Lu snorted. Of course, Mo Jingli didn't ask her to come. However, Tan Jiji was missing, and there was no one around her to give her advice. If she did not follow him, how would she know what Mo Jingli was up to? Mo Jingli didn't care about the dark and filthy cell. He walked in and said, You don't have to treat I like this. The Feng family is just a businessman. Even if I want to do something, I won't do it to them. Noble consort Lu's heart moved. The Feng family did not have enough power to move Mo Jingli in the court, but their money was enough to move anyone. Do you want the Feng family's money? Mo Jingli said indifferently, Do you think the Feng family is easy to offend? Because of your words, I confiscated the entire Feng family. Since you have already offended them, why don't you just offend them so that they will never rise again? You make it sound nice. The Feng family is Mo Jingqi's people. Naturally, they will not be loyal to you. Instead of letting others take advantage of them, it is better to accept them yourself. Even if I didn't do this, you would have done something to the Feng family sooner or later. Noble consort Lu sneered. Mo Jingli didn't deny it. While talking, the two had turned the corner and reached the innermost part of the cell. However, they saw a figure who shouldn't have been here standing leisurely in the corridor. He stood with his arms crossed and looked at them with a smile. Feng Zhiyao, how dare you? Noble consort Lu narrowed her eyes slightly and sneered. The smile on Feng Zhiyao's face deepened, as if he was in a very good mood. No matter how bold I am, I can't compare with noble consort. Ah, no, it's great noble consort who is about to be buried with me. As an imperial concubine, how dare you leave the palace at will? As an imperial concubine who is going to be buried with me, how dare you still live? Feng Zhiyao. Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth and stared at Feng Zhiyao with a cold face. The Prince Ding mansion caught eyes people. You go back and tell Prince Ding that I will personally go to him to ask for them. Feng Zhiyao waved his hand and smiled. You don't have to go to him personally. I'm afraid that noble consort Lu has an ulterior motive. Asking for the people is fake, and taking the opportunity to pester our prince is the real reason. Our princess is very jealous, so for the peace of the prince and the Prince Ding mansion, I will decline noble consort Lu's kindness on behalf of the prince. How dare you? Noble consort Lu angrily rebuked. She wasn't afraid of the whole world knowing that she liked Mo Xiuyao, but she also hated others who mocked her affection. Mo Jingli frowned and unhappily interrupted the verbal contest between the two. I didn't come to listen to your nonsense. Feng-san, you are really bold. Do you think that you can break into the Supreme Court with the support of the Prince Ding mansion? Feng Zhiyao smiled faintly. Not at all. Prince, you flatter me. Didn't His Highness raid the Feng family without any evidence or crime? Compared to your Highness, this one's ability is simply not worth mentioning. Seeing Feng Zhiyao, he naturally thought of the people behind Feng Zhiyao. This made Mo Jingli couldn't help but frown. He didn't want to fight with Mo Xiuyao now, nor did he plan to provoke Mo Xiuyao. But Mo Xiuyao stayed in the capital for a long time, which made many of his plans unable to be implemented. Mo Jingli didn't ask noble consort Lu why she wanted to capture the people of the Feng family. He was going to make a move against the Feng family anyway. With noble consort Lu as a shield, it was much better for his reputation. Why not? But he always thought that the relationship between Feng-san and the Feng family was weak. Feng-san intervened in the Feng family's affairs on behalf of himself or the position of the entire Prince Ding mansion. Or Mo Xiuyao also had his eyes on the fat meat of the Feng family. Frowning, Mo Jingli asked, how is Prince Ding? Feng Zhiyao looked at Mo Jingli in front of him in surprise. A scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes. If Mo Jingli mentioned Mo Xiuyao a few years ago, it would be considered very well-mannered if he didn't curse or ridicule him. Now, he could actually ask so calmly. Sure enough, power was the easiest thing to change a person's appearance. Nodding, Feng Zhiyao said with a smile, thank you for your concern, Prince Li. Our prince has always been well. Is that so? Mo Jingli said, I seem to have heard that Shiling Genom of Gojoseon seems to be interested in increasing the number of troops at the border. I wonder if Prince Ding has any plans. Feng Zhiyao said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, Prince said that he is on vacation. Everything is handed over to young Master Qingchen to handle. I'm afraid that Prince will have to ask young Master Qingchen about this matter. Mo Jingli and Feng Zhiyao could be considered acquaintances. He knew that if he really beat around the bush with him, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to talk about anything serious until tomorrow morning. He could only take the initiative to change the topic. Young Master Feng, are you here to see Master Feng? Feng Zhiyao shrugged as an answer. Mo Jingli said faintly, speaking of the Feng family's matter, the Prince Ding mansion is also somewhat related. However, I don't have the final say on this matter. Otherwise, for the sake of Prince Ding, it's not a big deal to make things easy for young Master Feng. Feng Zhiyao looked down. Was Mo Jingli telling him that he wasn't the one who was targeting the Feng family? He sneered in his heart. He would be a fool to believe Mo Jingli. He glanced at noble consort Lu beside him faintly. This woman was probably the one who was being used. Sure enough, she was an idiot with a beautiful face. No wonder Prince didn't like her. Chapter 6:14. Thank you, Prince, for your concern. I'm just here to take a look. Anyway, the Feng family doesn't need me to worry about someone who has been expelled from the family, right? Presumably, Prince and noble consort Lu have other matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave first. Feng Zhiyao was about to leave after casually cupping his hands in salute to Mo Jingli and noble consort Lu. Wait. Noble consort Lu suddenly spoke. Feng Zhiyao turned around and looked at noble consort Lu indifferently. Noble consort Lu proudly said, you can't leave. Feng Zhiyao suddenly smiled, why not? You trespassed into the Supreme Court. Do you think the Supreme Court is a place where you can come and go as you please? Noble consort Lu said coldly. So, noble consort Lu just wanted to find an excuse to make him stay. Feng Zhiyao didn't care and asked indifferently, "What do you want?" "If I want to leave, can you make me stay?" Feng Zhiyao's skills were a bit difficult to deal with a first-rate master like Mo Xiuyao. But it wasn't difficult to deal with Mo Jingli and noble consort Lu in this narrow alley. Before he finished speaking, Mo Jingli had already retreated to the side without leaving a trace. He had fought with Feng Zhiyao when he was young and knew that he was no match for him. In this narrow cell, not many guards could get in. If he was caught or accidentally injured by Feng Zhiyao, it wouldn't look good. Noble consort Lu certainly didn't want to fight with Feng Zhiyao. She sneered, "If you dare to leave, I'll kill Feng Whiting." Feng Zhiyao looked down. After a while, he sighed helplessly and threw a short knife on the ground from his sleeve. He spread his hands at noble consort Lu to show that he didn't have a weapon. Noble consort Lu was satisfied. She waved her hand and had someone come forward to catch Feng Zhiyao. At the same time, she ordered, "Bring Feng Whiting out as well. I want to take these two away." "King Li, is that all right?" Mo Jingli said impatiently. "Up to you." What he wanted was the Feng family's assets. In the past few years, the two sons of the Feng family had taken over the family business one after another. It didn't matter whether Feng Huiting was there or not. However, he still reminded him, "You'd better be careful. Don't overreach yourself. If you anger Mo Xiuyao, you won't have to die with him." Noble consort Lu snorted discontentedly. From the bottom of her heart, she didn't believe that Mo Xiuyao would kill her. "I naturally know my limits." Feng Zhiyao was taken away by noble consort Lu without any resistance. Only Feng Huiting was with him. The rest of the Feng family was left to Mo Jingli to deal with. Feng Zhiyao didn't care about what Mo Jingli planned to do. At least compared to the half-crazy Mo Jingqi and the self-righteous noble consort Lu, Mo Jingli still knew his limits most of the time. The Feng family fell into his hands. As long as the people of the Prince Ding mansion were still in the capital, at least their names were guaranteed. Inside the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiuyao, who had just received a report from his subordinate, raised his sword-like eyebrows and asked with a smile, "So, Feng Zhiyao was captured by noble consort Lu?" The shadow guard, who was standing a few steps away, couldn't help but tremble. He wanted to retreat a little further without leaving a trace to avoid the prince's seemingly peaceful but actually icy cold flames. But when he met Mo Xiuyao's smiling eyes, he froze. He braced himself and replied, "Prince, noble consort Lu not only captured young Master Feng San from the Supreme Court, but also took away the Feng family's patriarch, Feng Huiting." Mo Xiuyao snorted softly and didn't speak. Yili raised her hand and covered Mo Xiuyao's arm. She smiled faintly and said, "Feng Huiting is Feng San's father after all. If Feng San really doesn't care, then he wouldn't be Feng San. How many people in this world could have a heart of stone that didn't care about anything?" No matter how much the Feng family neglected Feng Zhiyao, Feng Huiting was still Feng Zhiyao's biological father. It was impossible for Feng Zhiyao to not care about him at all. Just like Leng Haoyu. Leng Haoyu's days in the Ling family might not be better than Feng Zhiyao's, but when he heard that Ling Huai was besieged, Leng Haoyu still remembered it like it was something. Mo Xiuyao rolled his eyes unhappily. He looked at Yili with some grievance and said, "I didn't say that I wouldn't save Feng Huiting. Why is Feng San sacrificing himself now?" Yili smiled and said, "I'm afraid this is an accident." Feng Zhiyao might not have known that noble consort Lu and Prince Li would so coincidentally choose to go to the Supreme Court at that time. It seems that this time, not only the Lu family, but even Prince Li is involved in the Feng family's matter. Mo Xiuyao was not surprised. Now, most of the power in the capital is in the hands of Mo Jingli. Without his consent, the Lu family would have to think twice if they want to touch the Feng family. I'm afraid that it's not the Lu family that wants to touch the Feng family, but Mo Jingli that wants to touch the Feng family. Yi Li's heart moved. She looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said, the Feng family's property. Mo Jingli controls the wealthiest place in the entire Dechu state. After all these years, he shouldn't be lacking money. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, that's not necessarily true. Although Mo Jingli controls most of the southern part of the Dechu state, his foundation is still very weak. In the end, his foundation is shallow. Jiangnan has a lot of aristocratic families, and their relationships are complicated. It's not that easy for Mo Jingli to get money from these people. And raising an army is a money-burning matter. You're saying Mo Jingli is secretly expanding the army? Yi Li naturally understood. She couldn't help but frown when she thought of her own guess. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and nodded. Mo Jingli hasn't just wanted that dragon throne for a day or two. When the new emperor ascends the throne, we'll return to the northwest. I won't be in the mood to play with him. Yi Li frowned and pondered for a moment before saying, since it's like this, why must we wait until the new emperor ascends the throne? Because I like to make things difficult for him. As long as Mo Xiaoyao was in the capital, even if Mo Jingli really wanted to usurp the throne, he wouldn't have the guts. Prince. Prince. The subordinate who didn't get a reply was still standing alone in the hall. He pitifully looked at Mo Xiaoyao, who had clearly forgotten about his existence. Is there anything else? Mo Xiaoyao asked. Finally finding a chance to speak, the pitiful person hurriedly used the fastest speed to clearly report what she wanted to say. Just now, I received news from Noble Consort Lu that Noble Consort Lu will be visiting Ding Palace tomorrow morning and has some matters to discuss with Wang Yi. Wang Yi, please do not refuse. A certain person who was holding her breath and did not pause for even a moment breathed a sigh of relief. Noble Consort Lu. Visit? Don't refuse. Mo Xiaoyao asked with a smile. The messenger was crying in his heart, Your Highness, this subordinate is just a messenger. This has nothing to do with me. Yi Li laughed and pulled Mo Xiaoyao. She smiled at the subordinate and said, All right, Prince knows. You can leave. Thank you, Princess. This subordinate will take his leave. The person who let out a sigh of relief turned around and disappeared from the entrance of the hall. In an unknown prison cell, Feng Zhiyao sat leisurely on the simple bed in the cell. Feng Huiting, who was locked in the cell next door, was still sitting on the bed with his eyes closed. He had no intention of communicating with Feng Zhiyao. Feng Zhiyao sat at the head of the bed and looked at the man in front of him whose hair was almost white. He snorted softly and walked to the railing to knock on it a few times. After a while, someone came in and stared vigilantly at Feng Zhiyao. He asked, Third young master Feng, what is the matter? Feng Zhiyao was instantly amused. Oh. You know me. Feng Zhiyao casually looked at the inconspicuous middle-aged man in front of him. He didn't have any impression of him. But he could see that his martial arts weren't bad. Feng Zhiyao said, Bring me a cloak. Do you want to freeze this young master to death? The middle-aged man faintly glanced at Feng Zhiyao and turned to leave. After a while, he came in with a dark green brocade rabbit skin cloak. He handed it to Feng Zhiyao and then turned to leave. Feng Zhiyao looked at the dark green cloak in his hand and smiled thoughtfully. He raised his hand and the cloak passed through the bars of the two cells without any obstruction and landed on Feng Huiting's body. Feng Huiting opened his eyes and stared blankly at the cloak on his body. He tilted his head to look at Feng Zhiyao next to him. Feng Zhiyao had already slowly walked back to his bed and was facing the wall on the other side, ignoring him. It was the middle of March. Even outside, one could feel a bit of coldness, much less in the dark dungeon. As soon as the cloak was on his body, the coldness that had been on his body dissipated greatly. Feng Huiting silently gathered the cloak around his body and looked at the man in the thin red robe across from him. His eyes revealed a rare softness. Feng Zhiyao was a martial artist and had been on the battlefield for many years. Naturally, he could feel the gaze on his body. He originally wanted to ignore it in a fit of pique, but the gaze didn't move from his body, making him gradually feel uncomfortable. He suddenly turned around and said unhappily, "If you have something to say, just say it." Without waiting for Feng Huiting to speak, Feng Zhiyao continued, "You don't need to think too much. This time, you were implicated by me. Don't worry, I will guarantee that the Feng family will walk out of prison safely." "What did you do?" After a long silence, Feng Huiting asked in a deep voice. Feng Zhiyao squeezed out a strange smile and looked at Feng Huiting with a trace of deliberate malice. "I kidnapped someone from the palace." As the head of the Feng family, Feng Huiting naturally had his own channels of information. Even if someone in the palace went missing, he would still know a thing or two. Hearing Feng Zhiyao's words, his expression couldn't help but change slightly. After a long while, he said in a deep voice, "After so many years, you still can't let it go?" This time, it was Feng Zhiyao's turn to be stunned. He really didn't expect Feng Huiting to know his thoughts back then. He looked at the man across from him with a somewhat complicated expression. After a long while, he anxiously growled, "This has nothing to do with you." The empty cell suddenly fell silent. It was so quiet that it was as if the two people's breathing could be heard. After a long while, Feng Huiting said, "You are so daring because you have Prince Ding's support. If Prince Ding is unwilling or can't help you, what will you do?" Feng Zhiyao was stunned for a moment, then sneered, "Isn't it a bit late to teach me a lesson now?" Feng Zhiyao did feel very guilty for acting impulsively this time, but when faced with Feng Huiting's cold expression and tone, he couldn't calm down and speak properly. Feng Huiting calmly looked at him for a long time, then finally sighed softly and didn't say anything more. Feng Zhiyao stared blankly at Feng Huiting, who closed his eyes and didn't speak anymore. His heart was filled with mixed feelings, and he didn't know what to think. Chapter 6:15. In the Prime Minister's mansion. In the study, Prime Minister Liu looked at his daughter who was sitting on the side with an indifferent look and frowned. He walked back and forth in the study room with his hands behind his back. After a while, he turned around and stared at noble concubine Liu. "Daughter, what do you want?" Noble concubine Liu raised her head and said unhappily, "What?" Prime Minister Liu said angrily, "What? Why do you ask? We had a good discussion before. Why do you want to mess with Mo Xiuyao at this time?" Noble concubine Liu frowned slightly. "How did I mess with Mo Xiuyao?" Prime Minister Liu had a headache. It was good to have a smart, beautiful, and spoiled daughter, but it was a headache to have a disobedient daughter. Rubbing his forehead, Prime Minister Liu took a deep breath and said calmly, "We had a deal. First, we will deal with the matter of the burial. Now that this matter hasn't been resolved and you've provoked Mo Xiuyao, if he suddenly interferes. You have to know that Father and Prince Li are still suppressing this matter under the pressure of those scholars and old pedants. As long as Prince Ding says something, those people will make trouble again." Noble concubine Liu supported her head with her hands and looked at Prime Minister Liu indifferently. "What do you want?" "No matter what, you should let Feng Zhiyao go first. He is Mo Xiuyao's man. Since Mo Xiuyao has said that he has no intention of interfering in the affairs in the capital, we should not mess with him for the time being." Noble concubine Liu said unhappily, "Prince Ding took Tan Jiji away." "Father, don't you know what Feng Zhiyao did?" "No matter what he did," Prime Minister Liu said firmly, "he took the Empress away, so what? It is not bad for us. If the Empress is still alive, she will be the Empress Dowager when the new emperor ascends the throne. At that time, the Hua family will be able to help the new emperor openly. Isn't it good now? The new emperor is still young. If his birth mother dies early, then as the previous emperor's imperial concubine, you will naturally be the most powerful person in the palace. What's more, Hua clan has such a weakness in our hands. By then, Prime Minister Liu showed a smug smile when he thought of the situation where Hua clan was under the foot of Liu clan or even under the control of Liu clan. Noble consort Liu lowered her eyes, and a trace of disdain flashed across her eyes. The most powerful person in the palace. So what? Even if it was the position of Empress Dowager, if she didn't have that person, what was the use of those noble positions? Prime Minister Liu turned around and saw the sneer and disdain on noble concubine Liu's lips. He frowned and asked, "Haven't you given up on Prince Ding?" Seeing noble concubine Liu's determined eyes, Prime Minister Liu felt extremely uncomfortable. He was about to spit out a mouthful of blood in his chest. What sin had he committed to have such a disappointing daughter? What a sin! It has been so many years. If Prince Ding likes you, he wouldn't have waited until now. Why are you still? Prime Minister Liu tried his best to persuade her. Shut up. What Prime Minister Liu said really touched noble concubine Liu's bottom line. Her delicate face was instantly covered with a layer of anger. Noble concubine Liu glared at her father in front of her. She gritted her teeth and said, "I don't believe it. He doesn't dislike me. He just didn't kill me." Prime Minister Liu didn't know what to say at that moment. Prime Minister Liu didn't know what to say. He really didn't understand where the Liu family's education had failed to raise such a stubborn daughter. A woman in her 30s would be a grandmother in an ordinary family. Even if she didn't enter the palace, she should be a lady in charge of a noble family. How could a woman at her age care about a man wholeheartedly? And a man who didn't care about her at all? Sin. Sin. Prime Minister Liu sighed and stamped his feet. Noble concubine Liu didn't care about her father's anxiety. She showed a faint but sweet smile. "Yes, that's right. He just didn't see me. Tomorrow, I will go to the Prince Ding mansion to see him. He will definitely understand how I feel about him." "Are you sure he won't kick you out?" Prime Minister Liu poured cold water on her mercilessly. Noble concubine Liu caught Prince Ding's people. The most likely reaction of Prince Ding was to detain noble concubine Liu as well. At that time, they would still have to exchange people for her. Maybe they would have to pay a higher price. Prime Minister Liu didn't think that Mo Xiuyao would pay a high price for Feng Zhiyao. After all, Feng Zhiyao was just a subordinate. If Prince Ding got angry because of this, it would be more likely that his dignity was challenged. Prime Minister Liu really couldn't admit that this daughter was taught by him. Noble concubine Liu smiled confidently. "No, unless he doesn't want Feng San to die." Prime Minister Liu sneered. "Why are you going to see him? Do you want him to marry you? Don't tell me you don't know that Prince Ding loves the princess deeply. For so many years, he only has Princess Ding by his side. Do you think Prince Ding will betray his wife for Feng San?" Not only that, Prime Minister Liu was also a man. From a man's point of view, it was absolutely impossible for him to abandon Princess Ding, who was also outstanding in appearance and ability and had been in the same boat with him, for a woman who had been married and had given birth to another man's child, even if that woman was as beautiful as a fairy. Abandoning his wife for pure beauty was a despicable thing to do. Prime Minister Liu wasn't a good man, but he wasn't despicable either. How could Prince Ding do something that even he disdained to do? Noble concubine Liu looked at Prime Minister Liu strangely. "Father, I really don't understand. Don't you know that both the new emperor and Nimo Jingli are far inferior to Prince Ding? As long as Mo Xiuya wants, he can get as much as the Dechu state. If I get better, the Lu family will get better. Why are you so against it? Prime Minister Lu bitterly smiled in his heart, but once again confirmed that he had failed to educate his daughter. It seemed that it was time to give up. Fortunately, two of his granddaughters were about to reach marriageable age. Although they weren't as beautiful and talented as his daughter, they were still excellent. King Li and King Qin had to be careful. As for Prince Ding, Prime Minister Lu had never considered the possibility of relying on Prince Ding. Not only because of the dirty relationship between the Lu family and the Prince Ding mansion, but also because Mo Xiuya's behavior was completely different from the Lu family's. Even if Prince Ding really married noble concubine Lu, the Lu family wouldn't get any benefits from it. Helplessly waving his hand, Prime Minister Lu said blandly, "All right, since you don't want to listen to me, then do whatever you want. But I just hope that you won't bring trouble to the Lu family. In the future, you don't have to come back. After all, you are a concubine of the late emperor. It's not appropriate for you to always go out of the palace." Noble concubine Lu paused, looking at Prime Minister Lu confusedly. For so many years, her father had never talked to her in this tone. It wasn't anger or coldness, but a faint disheartened and alienated feeling. Instinctively, noble concubine Lu didn't like this feeling. "Father, all right, you can go now." "Oh, right, I plan to marry Xian to King Li," Prime Minister Lu told her his plan. Chapter 6:16. Noble consort Lu was stunned for a while, then she got up and walked out slowly. She was not stupid. She knew what her father meant. It meant that the Lu family would bet on Prince Li. The Lu family had decided to give up on her and the Prince of Qin. At least, the Prince of Qin would not be the most important person to the Lu family in the future. In this life, other than being rejected by Mo Xiuya, noble consort Lu's life had always been smooth sailing. She had never thought that one day, she would be abandoned by someone. Father. Why can't you understand me? I am doing this for my own happiness. Is there anything wrong with that? Father, since you are so heartless, don't blame me for being unjust." Looking back, noble consort Lu glanced at Prime Minister Lu, who was thinking with his head lowered in the study. A trace of hatred flashed across her face, and she walked forward steadily. In the dark cell at night, Feng Zhiyao, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, slowly opened his eyes. He looked sideways at Feng Huading, who was sleeping on the bed with a cloak not far away. A trace of worry flashed across his eyes. "Zhuijing?" Feng Zhiyao looked at the door of the cell and asked tentatively. A deep laugh came from the door of the cell. Qin Feng appeared at the door of the cell and looked at him leisurely. He teased, "It's not Zhuijing. But Zhuijing asked me to tell you something." "What is it?" Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows and asked, "Why are you here?" He remembered that Qin Feng did not come to the capital with them. Qin Feng walked into the dungeon and said with a smile, "Zhuijing said. Prince is very angry. As for why I am here, it's a coincidence. As soon as I came to the capital, I heard that young Master Feng San was caught by a woman. So I came to visit him. After all, compared with Zhuijing, we are colleagues, aren't we? It's an accident." Hearing that the prince was very angry, Feng Zhiyao shrank his neck out of habit and said calmly. This was really an accident. How could he have known that the woman would run to the Supreme Court at that time? Noble consort Lu was a woman who had lost her mind for the prince. She wasn't Mo Jingli. If he dared to run, noble consort Lu would really dare to kill Feng Huading. Although he hated Feng Huading for neglecting him, it wasn't to the point where he wanted him dead. Qin Feng tilted his head and smiled at the person in the cell next to him. Uncle, I'm Qin Feng. He's Feng San's friend. How's Uncle? Feng Whiting, who was in the cell next door, woke up as soon as they spoke. A place like a cell wasn't a place where people could sleep soundly. Feng Huiting was startled, but he nodded and said, "This old man is fine. Many thanks, young Master Qin." Qin Feng waved his hand and said, "This time, it's Feng San's fault for being impulsive. When we return, our prince will teach him a lesson. Uncle, let's go now." Feng Huiting's expression was complicated, and there was a hint of bitterness on his lips. His son was impulsive, but he needed someone else to teach him a lesson and apologize to him, his father. For the first time in his life, Feng Huiting felt that perhaps he had really done something wrong to his son. Qin Feng walked up and casually pulled out a dagger that was shining with cold light. With a casual slash, the finger-thick iron chain and the huge copper lock on the cell were cut off. Qin Feng reached out and caught it, then threw it back and opened the cell door. Qin Feng stood at the door of the cell and looked at Feng Huiting with a smile. "Uncle, please." Seeing that Feng Huiting was still hesitating, Qin Feng smiled and said, "Uncle, don't worry. Although the other members of the Feng family are in Prince Li's hands, he won't hurt them." However, the Feng family's property was in doubt. It was a pity that they had made a lot of money in shilling last year. Prince Ding, who was already rich, didn't lack money. In any case, it was the property of the Feng family, so they were a little embarrassed to take it. Otherwise, they could also have a share. Only then did Feng Huiting walk out. He looked at Qin Feng and said, "Prince Ding's subordinates are indeed crouching tigers and hidden dragons." Qin Feng smiled faintly. He casually played with the dagger in his hand and said, "It's just a small trick. I've embarrassed myself in front of Uncle. Uncle, please. Our people will be waiting outside." Feng Huiting thanked him. He glanced at Feng Zhiyao and walked out the door. Qin Feng smiled at Feng Zhiyao and followed. Feng Zhiyao, who was still in the cell, was dumbfounded. "Qin Feng. I haven't come out yet." Qin Feng looked at the sky innocently. "What?" "The order I received was to save Master Feng, who was implicated by the subordinates of the Prince Ding mansion. Who else is there?" "I didn't hear anything." "You?" Feng Zhiyao gritted his teeth. Qin Feng smiled very happily. "Feng San, you should obediently continue to stay in prison. Maybe by the time you come out, Prince's anger will have subsided. Also, don't tell me you can't break a small iron chain." "Oh, Anne. Prince Ding Mansion has ordered that since you like to stay in prison so much, you can stay there for 2 more days. Don't worry, that woman definitely won't kill you for the sake of the prince. Just you wait." Feng Zhiyao glared angrily at the person who left. He knew that Imo Xiuyao wouldn't do this just to punish him. However, when he thought of Qin Feng's smug and mocking expression, he couldn't help but curse in his heart with resentment. This young master curses your love life to be bumpy. Qin Feng, who had just walked out of the secret cell, shivered for no reason. He raised his head and looked at the sky. The weather in March was indeed a bit cold. Qin Feng brought Feng Whiting out. They didn't encounter any obstructions along the way. Seeing the powerful subordinates of the Prince Ding mansion, Feng Whiting's heart wavered and he pondered deeply. When they returned to the Prince Ding mansion, the sky was already slightly bright. Feng Whiting was familiarized with the place. After eating a bit of breakfast, he was brought to see Mo Xiuyao and Yili. Mo Xiuyao and Yili weren't in the study. Instead, they were in a quiet little garden in the depths of the Prince Ding mansion. When Feng Whiting was brought over, Mo Xiuyao was practicing his swordsmanship. Not far away, Yili and the Empress were sitting at a stone table and talking. Not far from the table, two children were squatting on the ground with their heads together. It was unknown what they were talking about. The first rays of the morning sun shone in the courtyard. The faint fragrance of orchids filled one's nose, making one feel relaxed and happy. "It's old Master Feng. Come and sit." Yili was the first to notice Feng Whiting. She turned around and spoke with a smile. Feng Whiting walked forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Greetings to Princess Ding. Greetings to Empress, Nyang Nyang." Almost instantly, the Empress clearly sensed that Feng Whiting was criticizing her. She smiled faintly and didn't speak. She was only a guest right now, so she naturally couldn't steal the limelight. Yili sighed helplessly in her heart. If the Empress could sense it, she would naturally be able to. Mo Xiaoyao had dragged the Empress to see Feng Zhiyao together. She didn't know if Feng Zhiyao would blame them in the future. However, Yili understood Mo Xiaoyao's thoughts. If the Empress was going to be with Feng Zhiyao in the future, then Feng Whiting was a hurdle they had to pass. If Feng Zhiyao really didn't care about Feng Whiting, or if Feng Whiting didn't care about Feng Zhiyao at all, then it wasn't a big deal. However, Feng Zhiyao's behavior clearly wasn't the case. The reason why Feng Whiting was hostile to the Empress was naturally because of Feng Zhiyao. "Old Master Feng, please sit." Feng San's impulsive actions have implicated the Feng family. "Please don't blame him, Old Master Feng." Hearing this, Feng Whiting smiled bitterly. "Wang Fei is too serious. This old man is ashamed. If he hadn't neglected his son and neglected to teach him, Feng Zhiyao might not have cared so much about the Empress and even impulsively barged into the palace to kidnap her." He also knew how much the Empress cared for Feng Zhiyao in the past, so even so, he didn't have the face to blame the Empress. Looking at the white-clothed child who shyly jumped into Princess Ding's arms and the black-clothed boy who walked over with a solemn expression and climbed onto a stool to sit properly, a trace of regret flashed through Feng Whiting's eyes. If Zhiyao's child might have already been older than these two children. Chapter 617. What? These two bastards. Feng Huiting gritted his teeth in anger. The reason why the Feng family was loyal to Mo Jingqi was not without reason. Back then, the Feng family almost experienced a disaster. At that time, it was Mo Jingqi, who was still a prince, who helped. No matter how much people criticized Mo Jingqi's character, he had truly saved the Feng family and its huge foundation. It was because of this that Feng Huiting drove out Feng Zhiyao, who was close to Prince Ding. It was not only because he was afraid of being suspected by the royal family. The Feng family clearly knew that Mo Jingli was harmed by him, but they still relied on him. Although Feng Huiting was a businessman, he still maintained some integrity. In the eyes of Feng Huiting, this was ungrateful behavior. Mo Xiaoyao glanced at the silent Empress with a faint smile and said, "Master Feng, you don't need to be angry. Speaking of which, your son is just thinking about the lives of the Feng family." Of course, he added fuel to the fire. He did not feel regret handing over more than half of the Feng family to Mo Jingli. Money could be earned at any time, but the people who earned money, the two legitimate sons of the Feng family, were enough. The one who was truly capable was the one in front of him. The Feng family only had its current power and wealth in his hands. Prince Ding's residence had a wide variety of businesses and there were countless of them. He could no longer trust Han Mingyue. Han Mingxi and Leng Haoyu were gradually struggling to cope. Moreover, the development of the Northwest had gradually begun to reach a bottleneck. He needed business geniuses very much. So, what was a Feng family? With enough talents, he would soon have 2, 3, or even 10 Feng families. Although the Mo family was not good at business, they never lacked money because they were better at using others to make money. Feng Huiting was able to make the Feng family flourish in his hands. Naturally, he was not stupid. He smiled helplessly and said, "I'm afraid that Prince Li has long set his eyes on the Feng family's businesses." Many people knew that the Feng family was the late emperor's people. Although Mo Jingli was not as suspicious as Mo Jingqi, he would never be at ease letting the Feng family out of his control. Not to mention the Feng family's coveted wealth. Rather than saying that the matter this time was caused by Feng Zhiyao, it was better to say that it was brought about by the Feng family's wealth. Mo Xiuyao smiled and did not answer. He liked to talk to smart people. "Prince, noble consort Lu wants to see you." At the crescent door, Xue Jing reported. Mo Xiuyao smiled at Feng Huiting and said, "Aren't we here now? Is Feng San is here?" "Shua. What's wrong with him?" the two voices asked in unison. Before they could finish speaking, the two of them looked at each other with awkward expressions. Yili smiled and patted the back of the Empress' hand. "Xue Jing, if you say so, it should not be a big problem." But it was inevitable to suffer a little. Yili, of course, would not say that Mo Xiuyao sent Qin Feng to take Feng Huiting away in advance to deal with Feng Zhiyao. This time, Feng Zhiyao caused a lot of trouble, which made Prince Ding very unhappy. If Feng San had told Mo Xiuyao in advance, Missouri Xiuyao would have just had to move his mouth. But now, so many things happened. Of course, the prince was unhappy. "Let's go. Let's see how daring noble consort Lu is to dare to detain I's people." Everyone present, except for Yi Li and Mo Xiaobao, couldn't help but tremble at the coldness in his voice. Even the youngest, Ling Junhan, cleverly hid her little head in Yi Li's arms. Yi Li picked up Ling Junhan and stood up. Mo Xiuyao glanced at the little brat in his wife's arms. He snorted and reached out to pick him up. Ling Junhan hung in the air and stared blankly at a certain white-haired person. She pouted and reached out her little hand to Yi Li, "Auntie, hug." On the side, Xue Jing looked at the little dumpling in Mo Xiuyao's arms with admiration. Who said that Leng Haoyu's son was timid? He clearly had the guts of a leopard. Mo Xiaobao also wiped his sweat. Little dummy Leng wouldn't be killed by his father, right? This was the first subordinate he planned to have in the future. In the main hall of Prince Ding Mansion, noble consort Lu sat on a carved sandalwood chair, deep in thought. Opposite her, the handsome young master Feng San was tied up and thrown into a chair. Behind Feng Zhiyao stood two tall men, one on the left and one on the right. Their eyes were reserved, and the meridians in front of their temples bulged slightly. It was obvious that they were internal experts. Originally, noble consort Lu would never bring Feng Zhiyao to the Prince Ding mansion. After all, Feng Zhiyao was one of her bargaining chips. But when she arrived at the Prince Ding mansion, she realized that without Feng Zhiyao, she couldn't enter the Prince Ding mansion at all. Feng Zhiyao leaned back in the chair. Being tied up like a dumpling made him very uncomfortable. Also, his body was whipped a few times, and it was burning with pain. Feng Zhiyao, who hadn't been injured for a long time, couldn't help cursing in his heart. The way he stared at noble consort Lu became even more vicious. He must kill this woman. After waiting for a long time, she didn't see Mo Xiuyao come, and no one came to serve her tea. Noble consort Lu was not in the mood to criticize the hospitality of the Prince Ding mansion. Her delicate eyebrows were tightly knitted, as if she was thinking about something important. "Prince, princess." Outside the door came the sound of the guards and maids saluting. Noble consort Lu raised her head. Her eyes brightened, and her hands in her sleeves clenched tightly. Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li came in side by side. Mo Xiuyao was holding a pink boy in white clothes. Beside Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li was the young master of the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaobao, who made noble consort Lu gnash her teeth in hatred. Seeing noble consort Lu, Mo Xiaobao's eyes brightened. Noble consort Lu suddenly had a bad feeling. Before she could say anything, Mo Xiaobao said cheerfully, "Auntie, why are you here again?" "Auntie?" Ling Junhan tilted her head and looked at noble consort Lu curiously. She blinked her eyes in confusion. This auntie was very beautiful. She didn't look like the old auntie in the mansion at all. Idiot, little dummy Lang. The old auntie in the mansion is called Mama. This one is called Auntie. Mo Xiaobao said disdainfully. Obviously, little dummy Lang accidentally asked her question. Hearing Mo Xiaobao's nondescript explanation, and looking at noble consort Lu's expression, Yili couldn't help laughing secretly. Perhaps it was because Mo Xiaoyao had suppressed him too much, but Mo Xiaobao's ability to spout nonsense improved by leaps and bounds. Now, even Yili couldn't tell if he was being serious or purposely trying to anger her. Prince Ding. Noble consort Lu's face darkened. If he kept talking, she was afraid that she really couldn't help but beat the little guy. Mo Xiaoyao stepped into the hall indifferently. He put Ling Junhan on the chair beside Feng Zhiyao, glanced at the two people standing behind Feng Zhiyao, and said, "Get out." The two people moved, but found in horror that they couldn't move at all. They couldn't even move a finger, let alone do anything to Feng Zhiyao or the child who was looking at them curiously in the chair. They seemed to be stiff all of a sudden. Obviously, Prince Ding's skills were much higher than what they had imagined. Was this the strength of one of the four great masters? Sweat oozed from the two people's foreheads silently, as if it was raining. Chapter 6:18. Mo Xiaoyao snorted. He turned around and pulled Yili to the main seat. After Mo Xiaoyao walked a few steps away, the two men heaved a sigh of relief. When they found that they could move, they fell to the ground. Before noble consort Lu said anything, they rolled and crawled out. Ling Junhan sat in the chair and waved at Mo Xiaobao cheerfully. After receiving Mo Xiaobao's disdainful eye roll, she didn't care and curiously poked Feng Zhiyao, who was tightly tied up beside her. "Hey! Uncle Feng, what's wrong with you?" Feng Zhiyao smiled bitterly and looked at Yili for help. He didn't dare to ask Mo Xiaoyao for help. Otherwise, he wouldn't be willing to be untied by Mo Xiaoyao. Yili pursed her lips and smiled. She raised her finger and a silver light shot out of it. Feng Zhiyao felt cold on his arm. The rope that tied him up loosened immediately. Looking back at the silver blade that was stuck in the wall, Feng Zhiyao felt his hair stand on end. Well, he couldn't afford to offend her either. "Feng-san, are you okay?" Yili looked at Feng Zhiyao's clothes that were torn by the whip and stained with blood. "I'm fine." Feng Zhiyao shook his head. In fact, he was just whipped a few times. For someone like Feng Zhiyao who had been on the battlefield, it wasn't even a small wound. It was just a loss of face. "Prince Ding, I..." Noble consort Lu frowned and said anxiously. Mo Xiaoyao raised his hand to stop her, but the words that came out of his beautiful thin lips made noble consort Lu feel cold all over. "Take her out and whip her 10 times before she speaks." Mo Xiaoyao saw the scars on Feng Zhiyao's body as soon as they met. "Prince Ding, you..." Noble consort Lu's face turned pale. "What did you say?" Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently, "Feng-san belongs to the Prince Ding mansion. Even if he made a big mistake, the Prince Ding mansion should take responsibility for it. Since when was it up to you, a mere concubine of the inner palace, to decide? I don't care what you want to say. You have to take the whip." The guard outside the door heard the order and came in immediately. He walked to noble consort Lu without hesitation. The current noble consort couldn't be whipped. The consequences were serious. The consequences would be more serious if the prince got angry. These days, the prince was in a bad mood. Stop! Noble consort Luke shouted harshly, you can't touch me. I'm the current noble consort. Mo Xiuyao pouted in disdain. You're the late emperor's concubine. So what if I whipped you? Who dared to save you? Your father. Mo. Or your father. I have something to tell you. It's something good for the Prince Ding mansion. You'll regret it if you don't listen. Noble consort Lu bit her lips, which were trembling because of fear, and said anxiously. Take her away. Don't make I say it again. Mo Xiuyao said coldly. The two guards neatly dragged noble consort Lu out of the room, one on the left and one on the right. Noble consort Lu only knew a little martial arts. How could she defeat the two guards? She was dragged away almost without any resistance. After a while, the sound of a whip breaking through the air came from outside the door. Mo Xiaobao opened his eyes curiously. Why didn't she scream? Yili covered her face. Was it really okay to block the two children? Most importantly, why was Mo Xiaobao not only poking his head out fearlessly, but also Ling Junhan, who had always been obedient, opened her eyes wide with curiosity and excitement? Was there really a problem with the way she raised the children? When Ling Haoyu and Murong Ting came back, how was she going to explain that their obedient son had become so cruel? 10 lashes were actually very fast. In less than half an hour, noble consort Lu was dragged back and put back in the chair she was sitting in. But this time, her white clothes were stained with bright red blood. Noble consort Lu could no longer maintain her graceful sitting posture. She could only lie on the chair weakly. She looked much more miserable than Feng Zhiyao. Feng Zhiyao looked at noble consort Lu, who was even more miserable than him, with a happy face. He suddenly felt that the wounds on his body were not so painful. However, when he met Mo Xiuyao's half-smiling eyes, Feng Zhiyao immediately shrank back without the courage to do so. He was still more miserable than noble consort Lu. He could foresee that the future waiting for him would definitely be full of disasters. Now, you can say it. Mo Xiuyao seemed to be in a better mood. He took a sip of tea and said. Noble consort Lu was trembling in pain. How could she say anything else? She and Feng Zhiyao, who was thick-skinned, didn't feel any pain. Moreover, the guards of the Prince Ding mansion didn't mean to go easy on her at all. She could still sit here now because the people who beat her knew that she had to talk to the prince after the beating, so they were a little merciful. Noble consort Lu gasped. She looked at Mo Xiuyao, who was holding a teacup and handing it to Yili, who was sitting next to him, with a smile in his eyes. Even when he was talking to her, he didn't look at her at all. She couldn't help but feel cold all over. You are so cruel, Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows. I didn't come here to listen to your nonsense. After suffering so much, if noble consort Lu still didn't know that the previous method didn't work on Mo Xiuyao, then she really lived for decades in vain. Clenching her teeth, noble consort Lu said, I can help you take down the 3 prefectures in the north of Dechu State and the northern tribes without any effort. Oh. Mo Xiuyao glanced sideways at her and looked at her suspiciously. Seeing this, noble consort Lu knew that Mo Xiuyao was interested. She was delighted and said in a low voice, but I have a condition. Mo Xiuyao leaned back slightly and leaned on Yili. He asked, let's hear it. I want you to marry me as your concubine. Puff, Feng Zhiyao coughed again and again. He looked at the woman in front of him with resentment. He hadn't drunk a mouthful of water for a day and a night. This woman actually made him choke. Yili couldn't help but fall back. Mo Xiuyao, who was leaning on her, could only sit up and turn around to hold her slender waist and pull her close. Li. Yi smiled apologetically. She wasn't angry or didn't trust Imo Xiaoyao. She was just frightened by noble consort Lu. She had just been whipped 10 times by Imo Xiaoyao, yet she was still so infatuated that she wanted to marry him. Wasn't she afraid that Imo Xiaoyao would kill her after using her? Wasn't she asking for it? The reason why noble consort Lu didn't love Mo Jingqi was probably because Mo Jingqi was too good to her. Seeing Yi Li's smile, Mo Xiaoyao rubbed against her with satisfaction. Li, what do you say? Yi Li raised her eyebrows. Shouldn't he solve this problem himself? What did he mean by pushing it to her? Shouldn't the princess have the final say in taking a concubine? Mo Xiaoyao asked innocently. Taking a concubine. Yi Li narrowed her eyes. Her voice was calm and contained a smile. Prince wants to take a concubine. I am a good husband. My beloved concubine has the final say in matters of the inner residence, Mo Xiaoyao said generously. Prince Ding, I'm not talking about taking a concubine. Noble consort Lu's face was livid. I want you to marry me, as an equal concubine. Originally, she wanted to say the official concubine, but seeing Prince Ding's attitude towards Yi Li, she knew it was impossible. Noble consort Lu decided to take a step back. As long as she became Prince Ding's concubine, then, tch. Feng Zhiyao sneered. Noble consort Lu, don't tell me you don't know. This equal concubine to the official concubine is the same as noble consort to the empress. They're both concubines. Noble consort Lu's eyes sharpened. She stared at Feng Zhiyao fiercely. Feng San, shut your stinky mouth. Otherwise, I will ruin your reputation with her. Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows. Ruin my reputation. Just like you, noble consort Lu. You personally went to the prince's house to force him to take you as a concubine. Let me think. You used the land of the 3 prefectures in the north of Dechu state as a bargaining chip. What's this called again? Treason. Noble consort Lu trembled with anger. She wanted to get up, but the pain in her body made her unable to move. She took a few deep breaths to suppress the anger in her heart. She looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said, Prince Ding, what do you think? Mo Xiaoyao said calmly, I never care about matters of the inner residence. Feng Zhiyao snickered. What an interesting way to put it. Did the Prince Ding mansion have matters of the inner residence? Noble consort Lu thought she understood what Mo Xiaoyao meant. It was up to Yi Li to decide whether to marry her or not. This made noble consort Lu very unhappy. But since Mo Xiaoyao said so, noble consort Lu could only comfort herself that it was because of Prince Ding of the Su family that he gave face to Yi Li. She raised her chin slightly and looked at Yi Li proudly. Miss Yi, you must know that I have benefits for the Prince Ding mansion and the Mahist army, right? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and stopped Mo Xiaobao, who wanted to jump up. She smiled faintly and said, with noble consort Lu's brain, you can't think of such a thing, right? Let me guess whose idea it was. Tan Jiji. Looking at noble consort Lu's gloomy face, Yi Li smiled faintly and said, Tan Jiji is now in the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. Does noble consort Lu think it's interesting to use this to negotiate? But I still have to thank noble consort Lu for providing such interesting information. In addition, seeing that noble consort Lu wanted to interrupt, Yi Li lowered her voice and said, the 3 states that noble consort Lu mentioned are all connected to the northern tribes. The border is thousands of miles long. Once the Mahist army takes over, they will have to face the attack of the northern tribes and the condemnation of the people of the Dechu state. Noble consort Lu, do you want to help the Prince Ding mansion or do you want to harm the Prince Ding mansion? Noble consort Lu opened her mouth but didn't say anything. She really didn't understand these things. She just thought about it after listening to Tan Gigi's analysis. You're talking nonsense. Why would the Mahist army be afraid of the northern tribes and a group of common people? Noble consort Lu said with a pale face. Yili smiled and didn't say anything else. It was a waste of time to talk about the people's hearts with this woman who was crazy for a man and didn't care about anything else. Raising her hand and gently twirling the hair around her ear, Yili looked at Noble Consort Lu and said faintly, "It seems that Noble Consort Lu can't come up with any constructive ideas. Then please go back. If you don't have the ability, don't think about other people's men. If you really need something, there's a Qing Feng restaurant in the west of the city." Cough, cough, cough. Feng Zhiyao put down the teacup with a twisted face and looked at Yili with a frightened face. Qing Feng restaurant, that's a men's restaurant, right? How did you know, Princess Consort? Chapter 619. Noble Consort Lu's face suddenly became ferocious and ugly. Although she didn't know what the so-called Cool Breeze Mansion was, it didn't prevent her from understanding the meaning of Yi Kai's words. She dared to compare her with those lustful sluts. How dare she? Yi Li. You bitch. Before Noble Consort Lu could finish her words, she heard a bang. The woman in white, who was already covered in blood, flew out immediately. She crashed out of the hall and fell on the bluestone ground in the garden outside the door. He didn't show any mercy this time. Noble Consort Lu fell on the ground and made a loud noise. The guards outside the door looked down, but they couldn't help but feel jealous. Did they just hear the sound of bones breaking? Noble Consort Lu spat out a mouthful of blood as soon as she landed. She opened her cold eyes widely and stared at the man in white who strolled out from inside, as if she had never known this person. Mo Xiuyao walked up to her and looked down at the embarrassed woman on the ground, but there was no pity or emotion in his eyes. Who dared to curse her? Mo Xiuyao's words were as cold as ice, which made Noble Consort Lu tremble in pain. Mo Xiuyao. You are so cruel. Noble Consort Lu forced herself to sit up with one hand, and the other hand was strangely hanging on one side. Obviously, the arm that hit the ground first was fractured. Mo Xiuyao frowned slightly. Looking at the woman in front of him, whose eyes were full of hatred, he felt ridiculous. Do you think that because you helped I once or twice, I will be kind to you? And even let you humiliate I's wife? The Prince Ding mansion didn't owe her anything. Noble Consort Lu did help him back then, but the Prince Ding mansion also repaid her. They just took what they needed. It was funny to talk about this now. That woman. Is that woman so important to you? For her, you would even give up the north, which is so easy to get. Noble Consort Lu struggled to ask. Mo Xiuyao sneered. Was Mr. Li not clear enough? What's more, for her, not to mention what I haven't gotten, even if it's the entire world, I can give it up. You. Noble concubine Lu stared at the man in white in front of her in shock. Mo Xiuyao snorted, as if he was fed up with the blood-stained woman in front of him. He waved his hand and ordered the guards beside him, throw her out. Yes, Prince. The guard standing by the side didn't dare to delay. He hurriedly came forward and pulled Noble Consort Lu out. Concubine Lu was severely injured and couldn't move. She could only turn around and stare at Mo Xiuyao with hatred. Mo Xiuyao, you will regret this. Mo Xiuyao smiled coldly and ignored her. Noble Consort Lu was dragged out of the Prince Ding mansion and thrown out without hesitation. She fell on the ground under the steps of the Prince Ding mansion. The heavy impact made her groan. Obviously, she was injured again. The people who came to the Prince Ding mansion with her hurriedly rushed over and tried to help her up. A few of them helped her up, which made her feel so painful that she wanted to die. She couldn't help but shout angrily, "Get out of my way." Everyone was shocked. They didn't understand how noble consort Lu could be injured like this after a trip to the Prince Ding mansion. Fortunately, the Prince Ding mansion was located in the area where the nobles of the Chu capital lived. At this time, there weren't many people on the street. Otherwise, the royal family's reputation would be completely lost. Noble consort Lu struggled to stand up from the ground with difficulty. She was stunned. At the corner of the street not far away, a 12 or 13-year-old young man in brocade clothes was looking at her silently with a gloomy face. "Noble consort, it's the King of Qin." The maid beside her reminded her in a low voice. "My son." Noble consort Lu called him softly. The King of Qin looked at noble consort Lu silently for a while. Then he turned around and disappeared at the corner of the street. Noble consort Lu looked at the empty street in a daze. An inexplicable uneasiness quietly spread in her heart. Inside the Prince Ding mansion, Feng Huiting and the Empress were shocked and they saw Feng Zhiyao's appearance, but no one asked. Seeing the strange atmosphere, Yili had to ask herself, "Feng San, are you okay?" Feng Zhiyao looked at Yili gratefully and said with a smile, "Thank you for your concern, Princess. It's just a superficial wound. It's not a big deal." On the side, Feng Huiting and the Empress secretly let out a sigh of relief. Mo Xiuyao sat on the side and casually tapped the armrest of the chair with his fingers. He looked at Feng Zhiyao with a faint smile and said, "Feng San, do you have anything to say?" Feng Zhiyao's face immediately fell. He said with a bitter face, "I'll accept any punishment from the prince." "Very good." Mo Xiuyao clapped and said with a smile, "Since you accept the punishment, then, how about going to Qin Feng's place to receive your punishment? I don't want to see you for the next few months." Feng Zhiyao widened his eyes in surprise. For a moment, he didn't understand what the prince was thinking. Going to Qin Feng's place to receive his punishment. Qin Feng didn't seem to have this function, did he? Most importantly, Mo Xiuyao was actually willing to not enslave him for a few months. His surprise was seen by the other two people who didn't know the situation. They thought that Mo Xiuyao's punishment was very severe. Their expressions were a bit unsightly. After a long while, Feng Zhiyao nervously accepted Mo Xiuyao's order. This subordinate obeys. No matter how Mo Xiuyao wanted to torment him, he couldn't escape. He might as well face it calmly. "Prince." Two figures called out at the same time. Feng Huiting and the Empress couldn't help but look at each other. In the end, it was Feng Huiting who spoke, "Prince, this time, it was all because of this old man. I ask that the prince give this old man some face and be lenient." Feng Zhiyao looked at Feng Huiting with surprise. His face was calm, but his brows were slightly furrowed. He obviously didn't expect Feng Huiting to plead for him. Mo Xiuyao said indifferently, "Master Feng is too serious. This matter was caused by Feng San. How can Master Feng be blamed? Moreover, I have always been clear about rewards and punishments. Feng San has caused such a big matter. If I don't punish him, how can I convince the public?" Feng Huiting was also a person of authority. He naturally knew the importance of being clear about rewards and punishments. However, Mo Xiuyao's following words made his heart sink. "Don't worry. I will spare his life." "Prince, isn't this a bit too heavy?" It was clear that Mo Xiuyao and Feng Huiting had a serious disagreement. Mo Xiuyao had never thought of taking Feng Zhiyao's life. Naturally, he would spare his life. Feng Huiting, on the other hand, believed that Mo Xiuyao only needed to keep him alive. Taking a deep breath, Feng Huiting said seriously, "Prince, no matter what, Feng Zhiyao is this old man's son. Now that he has made a mistake, I, as his father, should punish him." Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows in surprise. He looked at Feng Huiting and said, I remember that the Feng family has already expelled Feng San from the family. His name hasn't been removed from the genealogy. Feng Huiting said firmly. As long as Feng Zhiyao's name was still on the genealogy, Feng Zhiyao would always be a descendant of the Feng family. Mo Xiaoyao pondered for a moment, then shook his head. It still won't do. Feng Zhiyao is already 30 years old. He has long been able to take responsibility for his own actions. Moreover, this matter is official and not family matters. Naturally, I will have to deal with it. Feng San, do you have anything to say? Chapter 620. Feng Zhiyao had already been stunned when Feng Huiting pleaded on his behalf. How could he have anything else to say? He shook his head in a daze. Mo Xiaoyao was in a good mood as he turned to look at Feng Huiting. Look, Feng San himself doesn't have any objections. Feng Huiting gritted his teeth and said, It's this old man's fault for not teaching his son well. This old man is willing to accept the punishment in his place. I ask Prince to grant my wish. Mo Xiaoyao stared at Feng Huiting and said indifferently, Master Feng, you must think this through. The punishments in the Prince Ding mansion have always been severe. Not to mention an old and weak person like Master Feng, even those young people who have undergone special training can't endure it. Accepting the punishment in place of someone else should be doubled. Feng Huiting said firmly, It's the father's fault for not teaching. This old man deserves it. I ask Prince to grant my wish. The smile on Mo Xiaoyao's face became even more joyful. Feng San, what do you say? Feng Zhiyao finally came back to his senses. He frowned and said coldly, A man is responsible for his own actions. Who wants him to accept the punishment in place of him? This young master has nothing to do with him. Mo Xiaoyao looked at Feng Huiting awkwardly. Master Feng, you see. Yili secretly tugged at his sleeve, indicating for him to stop before going too far. Feng Huiting glanced at Feng Zhiyao and said to Mo Xiaoyao, As long as his surname is Feng, he won't be able to make the decision. I ask Prince to grant his wish. Good. Mo Xiaoyao turned and gave Yili a reassuring smile. Guards. Take Master Feng away to receive his punishment. Prince. Feng Zhiyao stomped his feet in anger. Of course, he knew that Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't really torture him to death. However, the possible punishment didn't mean that his father, who was nearly 60 years old, would be able to endure it. The guards outside had already come in and escorted Feng Huiting away. Just as Feng Zhiyao was about to run out of the door, a gust of wind blew past. Feng Zhiyao felt his legs go numb, and he fell to his knees. He could only watch as Feng Zhiyao was taken away. Why are you running? I haven't settled the score with you yet, Mo Xiaoyao said with a smile as he looked at Feng Zhiyao, who was kneeling on the ground with one leg. Feng Zhiyao said with a bitter face, Prince, that old man is almost 60 years old. Are you really going to kill him? Mo Xiaoyao glanced at him and said, Isn't killing him exactly what you want? Don't you hate him to death? Feng Zhiyao gritted his teeth. He's my father. No matter how unhappy he was that the old man was biased, he couldn't really want his father to die. I remember that someone just told me that it had nothing to do with him. Now it's your father. Prince. Feng Zhiyao was so anxious that he wanted to cry. He could only hope that his brothers wouldn't act so quickly. According to the speed of noble consort Lu's misfortune, the execution might be over if they dilly-dallied for a while. Prince, I was wrong. What do you want? I'll work for you until I die, okay? Mo Xiaoyao said with disdain, You were going to work for me until you die. Then what do you want? Have your father come with us to the northwest. I didn't ask. Ha! Feng Zhiyao was dumbfounded. How come he didn't know that Mo Xiaoyao had taken a fancy to his father? You don't agree? Mo Xiaoyao narrowed his eyes dangerously. I agree. I agree. Feng Zhiyao nodded repeatedly. But I'm afraid my father won't agree. Mo Xiaoyao leisurely clapped his hands and smiled. That's none of I's business. You can tell him that if he doesn't agree, I will kill you. Go. Waving his hand, Mo Xiaoyao sent Feng Zhiyao away with satisfaction. Seeing Yi Li and the Empress covering their mouths to hold back their laughter, Feng Zhiyao realized that he had been fooled. Helplessly hanging his head, Feng Zhiyao went out to find his father. Behind him came Mo Xiaoyao's obviously happy voice. It's all over. Your father must remember to go to the study and finish all the work that has piled up these days. You said it yourself, work until you die. Feng Zhiyao's legs went soft. He was a pig's brain. Watching Feng Zhiyao leave with a smile, Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said helplessly, why did you have to tease him like that? Mo Xiaoyao coldly snorted and said, tease him. I didn't tease him. If he doesn't help me out in these few months, I will let him down. Yi Li shook her head and asked, do you think Feng Zhiyao can persuade Master Feng? To be honest, a business genius like Feng Whiting was indeed what they needed right now. Whether it was Han Mingxi or Leng Haoyu, they couldn't be considered talents in this area. Leng Haoyu's management of the Prince Ding Mansion's businesses wasn't a problem, but it was a bit difficult to support the economy of the entire Northwest and even a larger area. Moreover, Leng Haoyu himself came from a family of generals. For the sake of the Prince Ding Mansion, he had been an unknown businessman all these years. It was really a bit unfair for him. Yi Li understood that Mo Xiaoyao was probably already preparing to find a talent to replace him when he was sent to the Purple Thorns past this time. However, Yi Li was still a bit surprised that he would find Feng Whiting. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, unless he doesn't want Feng Zhiyao's life anymore. Yi Li shook her head and said with some pessimism, he's only Feng Zhiyao's father. On the other side are 2 legitimate sons and the entire Feng family. Feng Zhiyao alone probably isn't enough. Mo Xiaoyao said, that depends on whether Feng Whiting is a true businessman or not. It's not enough for a businessman to not have enough foresight. If that's the case, then it's fine to not use him. The Empress looked at the two and said softly with a smile, the prince has put in a lot of effort for his subordinates. He really is a rare wise ruler in the world. If the Feng family follows you, they will definitely not suffer in the future. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her and said, then what about the Hua family? The Empress was startled and shook her head helplessly, the Hua family. I can't make the decision. She understood her father well enough. Even if the Dechu state was really going to be destroyed, he probably wouldn't leave the Dechu state. They had fought for this country their entire lives. The older generation actually viewed the Dechu state as more important than their own lives. It was impossible to convince them to leave. Mo Xiaoyao clearly understood Duke Hua well enough. He nodded and said, I won't force the Hua family to make a decision. Thank you, Xiaoyao. The Empress smiled faintly. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. In the Li Palace, Missouri Jingli, who had just obtained almost all of the Feng family, sat in the study in a good mood and looked at the accounts that the Feng family had just sent over. His lips curled into a cold smile. So what if Mo Jingqi's last-minute stroke ruined all of his plans? He was still alive. Mo Jingqi was already dead. Only the living could see the future's ending. Only the living could see everything. Mo Jingqi was counting on Mo Xiaoyao to clean up the mess for him. Unfortunately, Mo Xiaoyao was not interested in this at all. Moreover, with his current strength, even if he wanted to go head-to-head with Mo Xiaoyao, he might be able to put up a fight. However, Thinking of the stalemate in the Purple Thorn Pass, Mo Jingli snorted. He couldn't go and provoke Mo Xiaoyao for now. Chapter 621. Prince, noble consort Lu is here. Outside the door, the steward reported. Mo Jingli frowned unhappily and said, "What is she doing here?" Although he was not afraid of any gossip now, noble consort Lu was his brother's widow after all. How could noble consort Lu come to the Prince Regent's mansion when the late emperor's body was still cold? Moreover, Mo Jingli had always disliked noble consort Lu. Naturally, he was not happy to hear that she came to his mansion so suddenly. Noble consort Lu seems to be seriously injured. She said that she must see the prince. The steward reported carefully. Mo Jingli snorted and said, "She went to the Prince Regent's mansion to ask for trouble, didn't she?" He stood up angrily and ordered, "Take her to the flower hole." "I will go there later." Mo Jingli stepped into the flower hall and saw noble consort Lu's miserable appearance. He couldn't help but be shocked. Her snow-white robe was stained with blood. He could tell at a glance that it was caused by a whip. Her clothes were even torn in some places. There were bloodstains on her pale face that hadn't been wiped clean, and her right hand hung unnaturally. "What happened?" Mo Jingli said unhappily in a deep voice. Noble consort Lu came to his mansion in such a state. If the news spread out, it would cause another disturbance. Noble consort Lu raised her head and looked at him. She sneered and said, "What else could it be? Don't you know it? Mo Xiaoyao did it." Mo Jingli looked at noble consort Lu carefully. He found that this woman seemed to have changed a little. Before, when she mentioned Mo Xiaoyao, this woman's eyes were always filled with undisguised infatuation and admiration. But now, they were filled with hatred. Although there was still some infatuation in the depth of her eyes, Mo Jingli believed that at this moment, noble consort Lu hated Mo Xiaoyao more than she loved him. Mo Jingli sat down opposite her and said indifferently, "I warned you long ago. Don't mess with Mo Xiaoyao. You should understand now, right? In this lifetime, other than Yili, which other woman had Mo Xiaoyao been so affectionate towards? Even Su Zuidi. Didn't she also die in the hands of Mo Xiaoyao? Don't compare that woman with I." Noble consort Lu said with disgust. Mo Jingli curled his lips and thought to himself, "Do you think you're any better than Su Zuidi?" Mo Jingli didn't bother to pay attention to her thoughts. He asked impatiently, "What are you doing here instead of going to the Lu family?" Noble consort Lu looked down and said calmly, "The Lu family. Ha! Earlier, my father told me that he planned to betroth my little niece to King Li. Prince Li had good luck with women. My little niece is indeed a budding beauty. She can be considered one of the top beauties in the capital." Mo Jingli frowned, but he soon understood what noble consort Lu meant and what the Lu family was planning. He stared at noble consort Lu and said, "What do you want to do?" Noble consort Lu said with a smile, "I know you want the Lu family to support you, but you don't want to be controlled by the Lu family. I can help you get the Lu family in one piece. You don't have to marry the Lu family." "What's the condition?" Mo Jingli asked directly. Noble consort Lu naturally wouldn't help him for no reason. Noble consort Lu said with a smile, "Prince Li is really straightforward. The condition is, I want you to help me kill Yili." Mo Jingli was startled. He looked down and said, "Kill Yili? Am I crazy? Killing Yili will lead to Mo Xiaoyao's revenge. Who can bear it?" When Yili fell off the cliff, Mo Xiaoyao decisively cut off all ties with the Dechu state. Not only did he occupy a large piece of land in the northwest of the Dechu state, but he also almost caused a great disaster. After so many years, Of course Mo Jingli could find out some of the things that happened in the past. After Yili fell off the cliff, Mo Xiuyao's health was very bad. Otherwise, Mo Xiuyao would have dared to attack the Dechu state. Not to mention that they already had a child now. Their relationship must be even better than before. Noble consort Lu sneered, with Prince Li's current strength, do you still need to be afraid of the Prince Ding mansion? As long as you have the power of the Lu family, at least half of the people in the court will support you. Then you can openly wait for the throne. Stupid woman, Mo Jingli said without any trace of politeness. The Mahist army might not have been so scary, but the situation between the countries seemed calm now, but in fact, it could be triggered at any moment. And the Dechu state was already facing an attack from the north. As long as the Mahist army interfered, the Dechu state would be an enemy on both sides. When the time came, the northern tribes would definitely benefit from it. The Dechu state now could not afford to offend Mo Xiuyao more than ever. You really won't agree? Noble consort Lu narrowed her eyes, then do you still want your son? Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with a trace of hostility, but he quickly suppressed it, changed the condition. I can't kill Yili. Not to mention anything else, Yili herself is a first-class expert. She also has the Shadow Guard and Qi Lin by her side. If it was so easy to kill her, would you come back to I? Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth and thought for a moment, kill Yili's son. Why? Mo Jingli frowned and asked. I want her to live a life worse than death. Noble consort Lu's beautiful face was twisted like a ghost's. I want her to lose the most important person in her life. I want her to live in heart-wrenching pain day and night, and never have peace for the rest of her life. The hall was silent for a moment. Mo Jingli said, I refuse. You. Noble consort Lu stared at Mo Jingli angrily. Mo Jingli sneered, don't think that this trick will work every time. Until now, I haven't even seen my son. I said, if you dare to lie to me, I will make your life worse than death. Noble consort Lu's body trembled slightly. The pain that she tried to ignore came faintly, and she couldn't help but moan in pain. With a pale face, noble consort Lu stood up and said, since you don't believe then there's nothing to talk about. I'll leave now. Mo Jingli stared at her and said, I don't care what you want to do. Just don't touch Yili. Noble consort Lu raised her eyebrows in surprise. She turned around and looked at Mo Jingli for a while, then said, don't touch Yili. It seems that Prince Li doesn't want to promise me, not because he is afraid of Prince Ding, but because he really misses Yili. It's rare that Prince Li would miss a woman he doesn't want to leave. Or, are men so cheap that they can't get what they want? Mo Jingli sneered, that's none of your business. It's better than him not even taking a look at you even if you send yourself to his door. You, humph. Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth and left in a huff. She left proudly with countless thoughts and calculations in her mind, but she didn't know that the real unlucky thing was staring at her from behind. Do you think I just can't control you? It was you, this bitch, who instigated the discord between the late emperor and brotherly, causing us, mother and son, to have a weak relationship. Do you think there's anyone who can support you now? The late emperor's body hasn't even turned cold, and you're already running to the Prince Ding mansion. You're really, really shameless. You've disgraced the imperial family. The Empress Dowager cursed and stared at noble consort Lu with hatred in her eyes. If it weren't for the fact that Mo Jingqi only favored noble consort Lu and even contradicted her, his own mother, she wouldn't have turned to raise her youngest son. Wasn't it because she was afraid that her eldest son would be bewitched by this bitch and lose her foothold in the imperial palace? If it weren't for this bitch, how could they, mother and son, end up like this? Noble consort Lu sneered coldly, you didn't teach your son well. How can you blame I? Bitch. If I don't teach you a lesson today, you won't know what you are. The Empress Dowager sneered. Noble consort Lu's phoenix-like eyes flickered. How dare you touch me? The Empress Dowager laughed. Try me. Guards, drag this shameless bitch away and beat her 30 times with the paddle. He wanted everyone to see that this was the consequence of being shameless. Besides, demote noble consort Lu to noble lady. How dare you? Guards. Noble consort Lu said harshly. Her henchmen who were guarding in her hall didn't respond. The Empress Dowager showed a complacent smile to her. The eunuchs guarding outside the hall came in and wanted to take her away. Noble consort Lu struggled and said, Old woman. If you dare to touch I won't let you go. The Empress Dowager didn't take her threat seriously at all. The Lu family has given up on you. What can you use to not let me go? Besides, do you think I'm still afraid of the Lu family now? Noble consort Lu was stunned. She looked at the Empress Dowager, who seemed to be winning and didn't seem to be in a panic these days. She knew that the Empress Dowager might have gotten some bargaining chips. Otherwise, the Empress Dowager wouldn't dare to be so rude to her. If you dare to touch I, take her away. Beat her. The Empress Dowager said. Soon, the sound of the paddle came from outside the hall. It was very clear in the empty hall. The timid concubines in the hall had already turned pale. The Empress Dowager was drinking tea peacefully. Hearing the sound of the paddle outside, a trace of pleasure flashed through her eyes. Empress Dowager, is it? Madame Li's face turned pale. She looked at the Empress Dowager and hesitated. The Empress Dowager said indifferently, you will be the Empress Dowager in the future. Learn more. Some people don't know how high the sky is until they are taught a lesson. Madame Li moved her lips. Finally, she nodded in a low voice. Yes, Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager nodded with satisfaction. Noble consort Lu was already covered with wounds. She fainted before she could endure more than 30 strokes of the plank. The Empress Dowager had been holding a grudge against noble consort Lu for a long time. How could she let her off so easily? Without blinking, she ordered people to wake noble consort Lu up with water and continue to paddle her. After 30 paddles, noble consort Lu passed out because of the pain. She wished she could die now. After the last paddle, noble consort Lu finally fell into darkness again. In the Zhengde Palace, the Empress Dowager waved the servants away and stepped into the bedchamber alone. At this time, there was an ordinary-looking palace maid sitting in the splendid bedchamber. She couldn't be recognized in a crowd. Seeing the Empress Dowager come in, the palace maid was neither surprised nor stood up. She said with a smile, I already know what happened just now. I think the prince will be very satisfied. The Empress Dowager lowered her eyes. She was so careful that she didn't look like the mother of the country. She asked in a low voice, then. Prince Ding's promise. The palace maid said with a smile, don't worry, Empress Dowager. Although our prince has a grudge against Imo Jingqi, he will take responsibility for what he did. He will never make things difficult for you. As long as you do what the prince asked you to do, not only the matter of the burial can be solved, but also the power that belonged to the Empress in the original can be given to you. By then, you can completely control the whole palace. What do you need to be afraid of? Although the palace maid looked ordinary, her expression and words were very persuasive. Especially the power in the original Empress Dowager's hand had always been coveted by the Empress Dowager. Now she could easily get it. Tell Prince Ding to rest assured. Noble consort Lu is mine. I will take good care of her. Even if Li wants to protect her, I can make her die quietly." Speaking of this, the Empress Dowager's eyes flashed a murderous look. She didn't understand why her son refused to save his mother but helped a bitch who had nothing to do with him. Was this noble consort Lu really a vixen? It was not enough to bewitch her eldest son, but now she also wanted to bewitch her youngest son. Chapter 623. Princess Xianning was a little scared of this younger brother she had brought up. She twisted the corner of her clothes and said uneasily, "Xiao, that's our biological mother." Mo Xiaoyun snorted, "Biological? When did she treat us as her biological children? Do you know what kind of situation you are in now? If you and your younger brother are implicated because of her." The Duke of Qin was very concerned about this elder sister who had taken care of him since he was young. Noble consort Lu had been very cold to her children since they were young. Most of the time, it was Princess Xianning, who was 2 years older, who took care of them. Now that he had been conferred the title of Duke of Qin, he could only live outside the palace. His younger brother, who was only 8 years old, had to be taken care of by Xianning. Can't we really save her?" Princess Xianning asked carefully. Mo Xiaoyun sneered, "Do you know what she did?" "What?" Princess Xianning was stunned. Subconsciously, she didn't think that her mother would do anything unforgivable. Mo Xiaoyun said coldly, "She ran to the Prince Ding mansion to threaten Prince Ding to marry her and even insulted Princess Ding. If she really marries Prince Ding, no matter if she becomes the equal consort or secondary consort, what will happen to us? Sister, have you thought about it?" Mo Xiaoyun, who had been taught by Prime Minister Lu since he was young, wasn't stupid. He recalled that when Prince Ding had just returned to the capital, his mother had hurriedly left the palace. Afterwards, his father had promoted several princes and concubines. He knew that noble consort Lu's idea didn't only come about after his father passed away. Originally, he did not believe it, but when he saw with his own eyes that his beautiful and arrogant imperial concubine mother was thrown out of Ding Wangfu in a sorry state and refused to give up, his heart turned completely cold. Grandfather was right. His mother had never taken him and his brother seriously. For himself, for his sister and brother, he couldn't have anything to do with her anymore. How could it be? Princess Xianning opened her eyes wide in shock. She had lived in the palace since she was young and learned the female precepts taught by the palace nannies. What she remembered were the rules of conduct as a woman. No matter which one it was, his mother's behavior was undoubtedly spurned by the world. Mo Xiaoyun looked at her, "Do you understand? If you understand, then don't go see her again." "But, if I don't go, she'll die." No matter how ignorant Princess Xianning was, she still lived in the big vat that was the imperial palace. She naturally knew what would happen to a woman who was banished to the cold palace, not to mention that her mother was seriously injured. Under her brother's determined gaze, Princess Xianning finally lowered her head. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's. "I understand." Seeing that she agreed, Mo Xiaoyun's expression eased up. Knowing that his sister was upset, he said in a deep voice, "Sister, I'm doing this for our own good. Rather than letting her cause countless troubles outside, it was better to keep her in the cold palace. Could it be that you want others to know that we have another imperial mother?" Mo Xiaoyun did not finish his sentence, but Princess Xianning understood what he wanted to say. Princess Xianning nodded and said, "I understand." "That's good. Sister, you should rest early. I'm leaving the palace." Mo Xiaoyun said softly, "Take good care of little brother. Don't let him cause trouble everywhere." "I understand." Princess Xianning nodded. She pulled Mo Xiaoyun a little worriedly and asked, "How are you going to leave the palace at this time?" It was already the 4th watch period, and the palace gates had long been locked. Mo Xiaoyun smiled and said, "Since I can come in, I can naturally go out. Don't worry. Sister, take care." After watching her brother leave, Princess Xin Ning turned and entered the palace. On the way in, she did not even meet a single palace maid. Because they were not valued by their birth mother, their palace maids and eunuchs were not meticulous. Now that noble consort Lu was in trouble, these people simply became lazy in broad daylight. It was also because of this that Princess Xin Ning was gone for so long without being discovered. After returning to her room, Princess Xin Ning found the backup medicine she kept. She gritted her teeth and still turned to leave. She also didn't want people to know that she had a shameless Mufei. She wasn't an ignorant young girl who didn't know anything. She naturally knew that if noble consort Lu really succeeded and entered Ding Wangfu, what would happen to her and her siblings. Especially her, as a princess who was about to reach marriageable age. It was impossible for their mother to take them to the Prince Ding mansion, and as princes and princesses, it was also impossible for them to go to the Prince Ding mansion. But even so, they could not let their mother die because her injuries could not be treated. After delivering the medicine, they should go back. Princess Xin Ning thought silently in her heart. "I'm afraid she won't be able to live." A faint voice entered Princess Xin Ning's ears. Princess Xin Ning jumped in fright and hurriedly hid behind a flowering tree by the roadside. It was the end of the month. The crescent moon was dim and did not leave any trace as she hid in the shade of the tree. A pair of night patrolling eunuchs slowly came from not far away. Perhaps it was because it was easy to fall asleep late at night, the two eunuchs began to gossip as they walked. "That's natural. Don't look at that person who used to be the most favored in the 6 palaces. Now that the late emperor has passed away, he even offended the Empress Dowager. I heard that Zhangde Palace has sent word that that person must be put to death." "Pooh, don't talk nonsense. If it gets out, Zhangde Palace's eunuch Feng is my godfather. How could his words be false?" "That's true. Eunuch Feng is the Empress Dowager's right-hand man. I heard that Zhangde Palace is going to be overturned." "Isn't that so? I heard that person offended Prince Ding." "Sigh, have you heard about that?" His companion on the side revealed a tacit smile. "How could I not have heard? I'm afraid it's already spread throughout the imperial city. It's just that they don't dare to casually spread it out because they're worried about the imperial family's reputation. Who doesn't know that Prince Ding is devoted to the princess consort? After all these years, he hasn't even had a bed warmer. This matter in the past, that person was always as cold as ice, but I didn't expect." The words that followed were somewhat unbearable to the ears. Fortunately, the two eunuchs gradually walked away. Under the dim moonlight, the delicate young girl's face was pale as she looked at the small path that was already devoid of people, trembling slightly.